Chapter 1426. 8 punches, 72 echoes, shaking heaven and earth. The violent drum sounds slammed into his body like a wave. Qin Hao's bones cracked and his blood seemed to be evaporated by the drum sounds. Along with that, the serene water flowed through his body, and a strong power nourished his body. Every time his bones cracked, they would reform. The cycle repeated, tempering his body. Using the drum sounds to cleanse his body, Qin Hao wanted to break through to the first level of the Emperor realm. At that moment, the cultivators of Emperor Fallen Bay looked at the person beating the drums. He was like a reincarnated demon, unstoppable. The 72 drum sounds reverberated. In the sky, thunderclouds rolled. The might of the great Tao turned into lightning tribulation and struck down, spreading through the vast space. The void turned into a sea of lightning. Bolts of lightning as thick as pythons fell, bombarding Qin Hao's body. They cleansed his body. Bathed in the lightning, he stood tall. Then, a dragon soul avatar roared out, swimming in the lightning. Qin Hao gathered the second rule of the martial lord. Flames burned on his dragon fist. It was the power of burning. Burning could burn the dragon soul, fire soul, and water soul, making the power of the 3 souls rise again. It made his fist even fiercer and his recovery even stronger. Bang! Another punch blasted out. The 9th punch. 9 drums sounded together, merging into 72 echoes, forming 81 drum sounds. At that moment, the cultivators of Emperor Fallen Bay felt like their heads were about to explode. Their wills were about to be destroyed by the sound of the drums. Those as strong as Ning Tianxing, Shou Wuk, Qingji Han, and even Xiao Han all had blood dripping from the corners of their mouth. They quickly sat down cross-legged and Origin souls bloomed behind them. Soul power and Origin Qi interweaved, forming a strong Emperor realm barrier, blocking the impact of the 81 drum sounds. When that punch landed, Qin Hao's sleeve directly exploded. The place he stood collapsed half a meter deep. His stomach was in turmoil. The first drum in front of him fell back and exploded into pieces. Boom, 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 boom. Continuous explosions rang out. Under everyone's shocked gazes, the 9 dark green drum skins on the battle drum platform were penetrated by the fist light one after another. They kept falling backward. Every explosion was like an explosion in the warrior's heart until the 9 battle drums were reduced to dust. Crack, crack, crack. Lightning fell from the sky and flickered on the surface of Qin Hao's body. Amidst the lightning, Qin Hao's aura grew stronger and stronger. On the contrary, the lightning grew weaker and weaker, as if it was being absorbed into his body and refined. When the lightning dissipated, the dark clouds in the sky dispersed, and a powerful golden flame rose into the sky. The 12 streams of spiritual energy had completely merged with Qin Hao's Qi. He, on the other hand, had stepped into second-level Emperor realm. The stage sank, the war drums were destroyed, and the 81 drumbeats gradually subsided. But this shocking sound wave was forever imprinted in the minds of the martial artists of Emperor Fallen Bay. At this moment, Qin Hao was destined to become immortal. Countless gazes were fixed on him. They felt that the figure standing on the war drum platform was incomparably majestic. This monster. Zhou Wudao wiped away the trace of blood at the corner of his lips and stood up from the ground. He shook his head and smiled wryly when he sensed Qin Hao's aura as he stepped into second-level Emperor realm. His words really did come true. If he were to fight Qin Hao again, he'd have to flee even if he didn't use the sunset arrow. He really is a monster. Shou Wuk swallowed the blood in his mouth. He had to admit that he, who was born with the natural law of the sword, would have to flee if he fought with Qin Hao. Crown Prince Ningwu, is this what you meant by borrowing external power? Zhou Wudao smiled at Ning Tianxing. On the Emperor Road, everyone had been suppressed by the 10 Emperor's aura and suffered the calamity of the Emperor realm. At that time, only Qin Hao's cultivation had remained stagnant. It wasn't just the Emperor Road. The Emperor's path on the Emperor Road was the same. Ning Tianxing had used this as an excuse to accuse Qin Hao of relying on external power instead of true ability. Now, Qin Hao had broken through to the Emperor realm with the help of the Emperor Mirror's formation. Then, he'd used the sound of the war drum to break through to second-level Emperor realm. Borrowing external power? His cultivation hadn't improved? That was because he hadn't reached his limit. Now that he'd reached his limit, Qin Hao had advanced from 8th level to 2nd level Emperor realm. Were they happy now? Ning Tianxing didn't reply with a sullen expression. He knew when he'd stepped out of the ruins that Qin Hao hadn't relied on external power. Otherwise, the martial lord wouldn't have handed over the inheritance. What else could he say now that Zhou Wudao was pointing at him and ridiculing him? Big brother, you're too cruel. You even broke the drum. They were both second-level Emperor realm, but Xiaogua felt that the gap between them was so great. Idols are always meant to be worshipped. Yi Shuihan replied. The drum platform. Qin Hao took 2 deep breaths and slowly walked over to Lei Jiao, who was lying on the ground. He extended a hand and smiled. Brother Lei, are you satisfied with my performance? You. Lei Jiao snorted heavily, but didn't refuse. He grabbed Qin Hao's hand and stood up. You win, he said with a sigh. This sigh represented Lei Chuan's defeat. At the same time, he and Qin Hao had buried the hatchet and turned weapons of war into gifts of jade and silk. Lei Jiao wasn't stupid. How could a terrifying opponent be more precious than a peerless friend? Although he'd been tricked by Qin Hao on Cloud Mist Mountain, they were the ones who'd made the first move. Qin Hao was willing to let bygones be bygones and let bygones be bygones. He was more magnanimous than Lei Jiao. Congratulations, big brother. Boss, you're amazing. Brother Hao, it looks like I'll never be able to close the gap between us. Everyone walked over, feeling extremely excited. Qin Yun sighed. Once upon a time, his little brother, who could be intimidated by his sacred psyche power, had unknowingly grown into an existence that he looked up to. He remembered that at Broken Dragon Cliff, Qin Hao couldn't compete with the Wasteland's 3 great families and relied on him alone. But now, the 3 great families had been reduced to dust. Humph! Xiao Han glared at Qin Hao. His white clothes were torn and stained with blood. He didn't take his safety seriously. Didn't you ask me to beat the drum? I still have to pluck a star. Qin Hao said. I even asked you to go to heaven. Why don't you go up and show me? Xiao Han stared at him. Talk back? I'll go to heaven sooner or later. Qin Hao stopped Xiao Han with his arm and pulled her into his embrace. He kissed her on the cheek. Can you agree now? Aye. Xiao Han was about to answer shyly. Buzz. Above the void, space fluctuated as a tall black-robed figure stepped out, looking down at the thousands of geniuses under his feet. Greetings, Senior Divine Palace. When the black-robed Emperor Yuan appeared, all the geniuses bowed at the same time. The assessment is over. According to your results, those who pass stand on my right side, and those who don't stand on my left side. The black-robed Emperor Yuan issued a majestic order. For a moment, all the geniuses looked at each other and spontaneously walked to the 2 sides. Most of the martial artists' attitudes were very sincere, and they stood in line according to their results. However, there were also some guys who wanted to make up the numbers with a fluke mentality. They obviously didn't meet the passing standards, but they also followed the team to stand on the right side of the black-robed Emperor Yuan. As a result, before they could reach the place, they were smashed into ashes by the black-robed Emperor Yuan. After killing several people in a row, no one dared to stand in the same place. As the person with the best results, Qin Hao naturally stood on the right side, and his position was the closest to the front. Even Xiao Han, Shou Wuk, Qingji Han, and the others all stood behind Qin Hao, making him particularly prominent. This was probably the status that was exchanged for strength. In just a few breaths, the 2 teams were completely in line, and there was a clear distinction between them. On the right side were those who passed the assessment, and they were about to become official disciples of the divine palace. But on the right side, the number of people was quite miserable. Although the black-robed Emperor Yuan gave a minimum of 1,000 places 3 months ago, on the day of the assessment, there weren't even 800 people who passed the assessment. There were only about 750 to 760 people. The team on the left side was much more vast, and the losers accounted for 90% of the total number. Hundreds of thousands of geniuses from aristocratic families and imperial family members participated in the assessment. They crossed mountains and rivers to the inland sea, broke through the interception of the sea demons, and went through 3 months of hunger and tempering. In the end, only 6,000 people survived. On the left side there were more than 5,000 people. It could be seen how difficult it was to pass the assessment of the 5 arenas. But the black-robed Emperor Yuan didn't care. He had his eyes on the best batch of seeds in the continent, and he also prioritized the right side. He nodded and said, "Very good, you are all talented and have obvious strengths. In the future, you will all be qualified to become a great emperor. From this moment on, you will become official members of the Divine Palace." "Thank you, Senior." Qin Hao led the 700 people and cupped their hand. "As for the people on the left, how you came and how you left?" The black-robed Emperor Yuan said coldly. "Yes." An incomparably depressed voice came from the left side. Everyone lowered their heads, as if they were incomparably ashamed. There was no pattern to the opening of the Divine Palace every time. They knew very well that they might not have a second chance to participate in the assessment in this life. After all, on the surface, martial artists who were over 30 years old were not allowed to participate in the assessment of the Divine Palace. The next time the Divine Palace opened would be at least a few hundred years later. "Okay, next, I will teleport you into the Divine Palace first. After you arrive, someone will guide you to be under the name of the elders of each peak. During this process, remember that no matter what happens, you must not panic." The black-robed Emperor Yuan looked at the crowd on the right, and then his gaze fell on Qin Hao. He continued, "You, step out." The cold tone came, and everyone on the right was startled. Someone was going to step out? Why? The martial artists who didn't know the reason subconsciously raised their heads at the same time. At this time, they saw the black-robed Emperor Yuan Qi's finger pointing down, just pointing at Qin Hao. "Me!" Qin Hao was surprised. "Senior, why do you want me to step out?" Since the black-robed Emperor Yuan Qi wanted to send the disciples who passed the assessment back to the Divine Palace, Qin Hao, who had the best results, was singled out and excluded. What was the reason for this? "You have the great Emperor's providence and are destined to be an emperor. Since you have such a great opportunity, why do you need to be trained by the Divine Palace? Step out, let's go." The black-robed Emperor Yuan Qi said, his tone indisputable. "Senior, this is unfair." Showuk took a step forward and looked at the sky. Qin Hao's providence has yet to appear, and the Emperor Mirror has collapsed. On the divine grass platform, the grass transformed into a divine tree, towering into the clouds. On the stone statue platform, he merged everything into one. The golden bell soared into the sky, and the war drums sounded 81 times. We admit that we can't surpass any of them. Since the Divine Palace even accepted us, why can't we tolerate Qin Hao when he is so talented? Senior's orders, who are you to question? Changhe Lo couldn't help but be overjoyed, and he scolded Showuk. It's not that we can't tolerate him, but even if he goes to the Divine Palace, no one can teach him. In that case, why waste everyone's time? He has the great Emperor's providence and is destined to become an emperor. The world is so big, where can't he cultivate? The Divine Palace can do it, and so can the outside world. The black-robed Emperor Yuan Qi gave an explanation. Although there were some reasons, his tone revealed his determination. Qin Hao was not allowed to enter the Divine Palace. Chapter 1427. This came as a great surprise to everyone. The chosen with the best results should have enjoyed the best treatment in the sect. But this was not the case. Not to mention equal treatment, they were not even allowed to enter the sect. The warriors sighed. It was not a good thing for a person to be extremely talented. If they were so strong that no one could teach them, this was the saddest thing in the world. Some people were happy that Qin Hao could not enter the divine palace, and others were sad. Chang Helo was in a good mood. If he could not enter the divine palace, he could not learn any technique. Even if Qin Hao was destined to become an emperor, without the guidance of the divine palace peak master, it would greatly delay the time for him to enter the emperor realm. This undoubtedly delayed Chang Helo's death, and gave him a chance to fight back. Ning Tianxing's worried brows relaxed. The divine palace's foundation was unfathomable, and there was no lack of extremely powerful emperor technique. He knew that the great emperor level was also divided into several realms. Although Qin Hao had received the inheritance of the martial lord, he did not know much about the emperor path. So what if he entered the emperor realm? So what if he became a great emperor? If there was no one to guide him on the path of cultivation, he would stop at the emperor realm. Ning Tianxing was different. In his family, the great emperor was at the peak of the second realm, and he had an innate guide. Moreover, if he cultivated in the divine palace, he would come in contact with the guidance of many emperor realm seniors. And Qin Hao did not have any of these. New August 1st Chinese Network. According to what you said, those who have the great emperor's fate do not need to enter the divine palace. In that case, Prince Ningwu also has the great emperor's fate. Should he also be included? Shouwuk continued. Ning Tianxing could not help but be shocked. He pointed at him and said, Shouwuk, you've gone too far. Am I wrong? The Tianxing crown prince is quite powerful. I'm afraid that the divine palace will not tolerate you. Shouwuk said. You! Ning Tianxing was so angry that his whole body trembled. Wuk! Qin Hao took a step forward and gestured for the other party to restrain himself. On the surface, Zheng dynasty and Ningwu were allies after all, and it was not good for their relationship to be too stiff. Qin Hao looked at the black-robed Emperor Yuan and said, I came from Western Liang. Western Liang is barren, and martial arts are in decline. Since I was fortunate enough to participate in the Omen, I should enter the palace to learn the great Tao and prosper my homeland. Even if I have the destiny of the great emperor, what's the use of it if I can't enter the great emperor's path? The elder also said that the world was so big that there was no place to cultivate. The outside world could do it, and vice versa. Could it be the same in the divine palace? Why can't I enter the divine palace? Zhou Wudao's eyes lit up, and he secretly gave a thumbs up. There was nothing wrong with what he said. At that moment, many people who had passed the test were discussing this in private. The divine palace was teaching the world, and did not fear the land or the 100 clans. If they could not even accept the most outstanding candidates, then the fairness of the test would be questionable. You insist on entering the divine palace? The black-robed Emperor Yuan said in a majestic voice. I hope Senior will agree. Qin Hao bowed. Forget it, you can return to your position. The black-robed Emperor Yuan said. Thank you, Senior. Qin Hao returned to the team, and Xiaogua and the others couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief. At this moment, everyone felt a little puzzled. According to Qin Hao's performance, the divine palace should be more than happy to accept him, but the black-robed Emperor Yuan had the intention to exclude Qin Hao. However, everyone didn't think too much about it. Maybe it was just like what was said before, and there was really no one in the divine palace who could teach Qin Hao. If that was the case, it would inevitably damage the reputation of the divine palace. After all, even the great emperors wanted to save face. Your results have already been sent back to the divine palace. Next, I will activate the array formation to send you all over. The peak masters of the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace will send you invitations based on your result. As for which peak you want to join, you can decide for yourselves. An incomparably powerful force was born. The black-robed Emperor Yuan's palm pressed down, and it was as if the heavens were suppressing him, wanting to open a transmission channel. "Senior, wait a minute," Qin Hao hurriedly said. "What do you want?" The black-robed Emperor Yuan's tone was displeased, and his palm stopped. "I still have a companion who hasn't arrived yet." Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Qin Hao put his finger in his mouth, and a loud whistle came out, mixed with vitality that spread to the fallen Emperor Bei. From afar, a demonic beast flapped its wings and flew over. It was the dog spirit. On the back of the dog spirit sat 2 young men, one in black and one in yellow. The moment the restriction of the fallen Emperor Bei was lifted, Ahei and Huang were able to exert the power of their beast souls and transform into human forms. Roar! The dog spirit directly flew into Qin Hao's space ring with the 2 of them. During the Battle of Yunmeng Mountain, they intercepted the Xianyuan family's pursuit and later hid among the mountains. Now that Qin Hao had returned to the Divine Palace, he certainly couldn't forget these 3 demonic beasts. "Brother Qin Hao, there's still full." Xiao Han pulled Qin Hao's sleeve and glanced at the grass in the damaged flower bed. She had a strong feeling that it would be of great use if it was full. Qin Hao smiled and said a little embarrassedly, "Senior, I don't know what the grass in the flower bed is. If you don't mind, can this junior take it if you want?" It was originally an ordinary spiritual herb growing on the Divine Palace's Taiwei Peak. Because it has absorbed a lot of spiritual energy in the past thousands of years, it has caused its spiritual soul to mutate. Today, it has been nourished by your medicine soul and has given birth to spiritual consciousness. Since it has recognized you as its master, it doesn't make sense to force it to stay. The black-robed Emperor Yuan waved his hand casually, and the grass in the flower bed was wrapped in brilliance and fell into Qin Hao's palm. "Thank you." Qin Hao put the grass into the space ring and raised it under the beast spirit tree. At this time, an earth-shattering force pressed down on the top of their head. More than 700 disciples of the Divine Palace, who passed the assessment, were shrouded by the invisible power of the Great Path. The ground under the feet of the martial artists cracked inch by inch, and beams of platinum light penetrated the cracks and surrounded everyone on the right. "Activate!" As soon as the black-robed Emperor Yuan's voice fell, the earth suddenly trembled, and the river water of the Imperial Gulf set off waves. An incomparably dazzling platinum light shot from the island straight into the sky, as if it had pierced through the sky. With a buzzing sound, more than 700 people on the island disappeared in the light in the next moment. At this time, more than 5,000 geniuses standing on the left all sighed. This light rose into the sky, indicating that a new era was about to begin in the divine wilderness continent. The 700 people who disappeared were the rulers of the new era. In the future, they would be Emperor Realm Almighties, able to summon the wind and summon the rain. And they were just foils. "We will take our leave." More than 5,000 people saluted. Immediately, figures soared into the sky, summoned their primordial wings, and flew in the direction they came from, ready to return to the inland sea and return to their families. And this time, they were afraid that they would be in danger again. However, at this moment, the space suddenly seemed to have solidified. The central island was bound by the power of the Great Path, and the spiritual energy between heaven and earth disappeared. The primordial wings of the martial artists who rose into the sky dissipated, and their figures continued to fall back. "Senior, what is the meaning of this?" someone asked in surprise. This power of the Great Path that bound heaven and earth was naturally the work of the black-robed Emperor Yuan. As soon as you enter the Divine Palace, your soul will no longer exist. Do you think the 100% mortality rate is a joke? The sacred platinum aura of the black-robed Emperor Yuan disappeared, and in its place was a thick black liquid that lingered around his body, full of endless evil. Rumble! The central island sank, and amidst countless mournful screams, the river water surrounding the imperial gulf turned into a sea of blood. The blood river churned, and green skeletons drilled out of the river. With the resentment of death in their hearts, they covered the sun all day long and rushed toward the 5,000 candidates on the island. Chapter 1428. In a moment, more than 5,000 candidates were eaten up by the resentful spirits, leaving behind skeletons all over the ground. The scene was like purgatory. The cultivators lost their source of spiritual energy and were unable to gather their vitality and origin souls. How could they resist? After they died, they also turned into resentful spirit. Immediately, the ghost energy that covered the sky disappeared into the blood river. The black-robed Emperor Yuan floated calmly in the void, disdainfully looking at the thousands of corpses below. Even though these corpses had outstanding talent when they were alive, and they were the elite descendants of the major families of the continent, many of them were members of the royal family. In his eyes, they were no different from ants. Over the past thousands of years, he had long been used to it. However, today, he kindly gave Qin Hao a way out and let him leave this imperial bay. But he didn't expect that Qin Hao insisted on entering the divine palace. This was courting death. Actually, it wasn't his original intention to leave Qin Hao a way out. That Junior had obtained the inheritance of Lord Wu, which meant that, like Lord Wu, he also had the potential to become a god. This was the nutrient that the black-robed Emperor Yuan urgently needed. Qin Hao's death could bring him great benefit. A cold-blooded person like me should have nothing to do with this mortal world, but I actually became compassionate because of a ridiculous family relationship. The black-robed Emperor Yuan laughed at himself a few times and looked up at the sky. There were no gods in the divine wilderness, and he vowed to become a god. In order to become a god, he killed countless people. The people he killed were the strongest and most talented people in the world, generation after generation. He knew Qin Hao, and they were quite familiar with each other. Qin Hao obtained the inheritance of Lord Wu and attracted the divine brilliance. Maybe as long as he refined him and buried the peerless geniuses of Shouwuk with him, he would be able to achieve his wish of stepping into the god realm. He had been waiting for this day for thousands of years, starting from the day he personally destroyed the divine palace. The worlds spun as they were enveloped by the formation energy of the great Tao. Even though it had only been a few breaths of time, Qin Hao and the others felt as if countless years had passed. Just when the people in the array couldn't hold on anymore, the dazzling platinum light dissipated. As their feet landed on the ground, everyone opened their eyes again. The scene in front of them was brand new. This was a vast and boundless world. 7 majestic mountain peaks were suspended in the air with white clouds lingering around the waist of each mountain peak. There were red-crowned cranes flying freely in the clouds, and waterfalls from the 9 heavens were sloping down from the sky, making rumbling sounds. 7 majestic palaces were placed on top of the mountain peaks, giving people a sense of solemnity and grandeur. This whole scene was like a fairyland in a painting, so beautiful that it was impossible to take in. Where are we? Xiaogua had never seen such beautiful scenery before. Was this the immortal world? Idiot, of course it's the divine palace. Yi Shuihan lightly slapped Xiaogua's head and jokingly scolded him. However, the scenery was indeed beautiful. Even though he was born in the most prosperous Luoshui Empire in western Liang, Yi Shuihan was still intoxicated by the fairy-like scenery in front of him. This is the Divine Palace, the highest academy in the Divine Wilderness, the cradle that nurtured Emperor Yuan. We have finally become disciples of the Divine Palace. Senior brothers and junior brothers, we are about to become the protagonists of a new era. In the future, we can all become emperors. For a time, the martial artists who came to the divine palace couldn't help but cheer wildly. Many people cried tears of joy, unable to extricate themselves from their emotions. So this is the divine palace. Qin Hao sighed. The spiritual energy between heaven and earth was really rich, many times stronger than the outside world. With such superior innate conditions, the cultivation speed of martial artists would definitely be able to advance by leaps and bounds. It would be difficult for them not to become emperors. By the way, why didn't I see Xing? Qin Hao asked Yi Shuihan. This question had troubled him for a long time. Since the team gathered at Imperial Fallen Bay, everyone was there, except for Xing. Boss, Sister Xing, she. Xiao Ju stammered and finally gritted her teeth. She went to the East Continent, so she didn't participate in the Omen with us. To the East Continent? Why did she go to the East Continent? Qin Hao asked seriously. He had a bad feeling in his heart. I don't know. On the first day of everyone's departure, Aunt Yu talked to her alone. I don't know what they said, but she gave up participating in the Omen and went to the East Continent alone, Xiaoju said. Aunt Yu was Yi Shuihan's mother, the former master of Dangu, and the dean of Red Sun Academy XNQ. Qin Hao's face instantly became serious. Others didn't know, but he could guess a thing or two. XINQ sent Xing to the East Continent to inquire about information. It seemed that Western Liang would make a big move next. Of course, if they were to send troops to the East Continent, it was not impossible to send someone to investigate Sunset Peak and Daqin in advance. The key was that it was too dangerous for Xing to be alone, not to mention that the girl was good-looking. Don't worry. Master must have her reasons for sending Miss Xing there. I don't think there will be any accident. Yuning Chang saw the change in Qin Hao's expression. Although she didn't know who Xing was, she must be extraordinary to be chosen by XINQ. We'll talk about this after we leave the Divine Palace, Qin Hao said in a low voice, feeling a little dissatisfied. At present, he had just passed the assessment and came to the Divine Palace, so he couldn't interfere with the people outside. In fact, he didn't attach too much importance to the matter of taking back Sunset Peak and crusading against Han Linghan and Zhan Wu. On the other hand, XINQ was more obsessed with it than Qin Hao. But since Yun Yingchang said so, Xing safety should be guaranteed. After all, Yun Yingchang disappeared to meet the descendants of Zhan Lang in the southern region. Now that Xing went to the East Continent, could it be that XINQ had found out about the descendants of the other four war generals? Would it be Yu Feng or Qin Cheng? Qin Hao couldn't figure it out now. For now, he could only step into the Emperor realm in the Divine Palace first, and then make plans. He hoped that when he went out, Western Liang would not be in chaos. Dong, dong, dong. A few solemn sounds of bells came from a mountain peak in the clouds. At this moment, the noisy crowd immediately quieted down. Everyone knew that the peak masters were selecting disciples. Congratulations to the juniors for coming to the Divine Palace. The Divine Palace has the method to enter the Emperor realm and the way of the Great Emperor. However, the peak masters of the 7 peaks cultivate differently. You juniors can choose which peak master to study under according to your strength. Once you enter the peak, you will remember it for life. A vicissitude and extremely majestic voice came from the clouds, making the sacred paradise even more solemn. The voice continued, Tai Wei Peak, the master of the way of life, the master of the peak is Tai Wei Immortal. Yun Yi Peak, the master of the way of array, the master of the peak is Yun Yi Immortal. Yao Guang Peak, the master of the sound of 10,000 laws, the master of the peak is Yao Guang Immortal. Daozong Peak, the master of the way of the world, the master of the peak is Daozong Immortal. Xiantian Peak, the master of the inscription technique, the master of the Xiantian Immortal. Mizang Peak, the master of the way of killing, the master of the peak is Mizang Immortal. Every time the voice mentioned a peak, Qin Hao would see a word flashing on the peak. In the void of Tai Wei Peak, there was the word life. Uni Peak, the word formation. Yaoguang Peak, the word sound. Daozong Peak, the word Dao. Xiantian Peak, the word tool. Mizang Peak, the word kill. Each peak represented a different direction of cultivation. Except for the peak in the middle, which was the main peak of the Divine Palace, and also the place where the Palace Master cultivated, there were no big words floating on that peak. All disciples of the third rank and below can choose a peak of their own. The Master of the Peak will teach from time to time. During the teaching period, you can listen to whatever is said. Do not make a noise, do not ask questions, and digest the teachings of the Peak Master on your own. Second-rank disciples can also choose a peak. When the Master of the Peak is teaching, you are qualified to ask the Master of the Tao and ask for guidance. First-rank disciples pending. The voice said. At this time, everyone realized that a token was tied to their waist. This token was the Divine Palace token that they had obtained through the challenge of the battle platform. Now, a number appeared on everyone's Divine Palace token. Some were engraved with 3, some with 2. Qin Hao, Xiaohan, and the other people who had achieved perfect results in the 5 challenge rings were engraved with 1. This meant that the best group of people were first-ranked disciples of the Divine Palace. Chapter 1429. The disciples of the Divine Palace were divided into 3 ranks. Obviously, the first-ranked disciples were the most talented, and the third-ranked disciples were the weakest. When the 7 Peak Masters preached, the third-ranked disciples could only listen and were not allowed to ask questions. The second-ranked disciples could listen and ask questions. If they encountered something they did not understand, they could ask the Peak Master for help. As for the first-ranked disciples with the highest talent, it was unknown what kind of treatment they would receive. In the void, the majestic voice paused for a moment, giving the disciples time to choose the 7 peaks. At this time, more than 700 people were looking at the 7 peaks. The peaks were suspended in the air, surrounded by white clouds, and were equally majestic. Within each mountain, there were several incomparably tyrannical auras. Among them, the strongest aura gave off a suffocating feeling. Qin Hao first looked at the mountain peak with the word life floating above it. This mountain peak was named Tai Wei Peak. As far as the eye could see, the mountain peak was covered in lush greenery. The endless smell of spiritual herbs permeated the air, refreshing the mind. Moreover, the spiritual energy that enveloped Tai Wei Peak was obviously the densest among the 7 peaks. Here, the path of life was the holy land for cultivating alchemists and pharmacists. On the left of Tai Wei Peak was Uni Peak. The word array floated on the peak. The headmaster was Uni Immortal, who taught the way of array. On the right was Yaoguang Peak. The head of the peak, Yaoguang Immortal, was proficient in the sound of 10,000 laws and taught the way of music. These 3 peaks were located on one side of the main peak of the Divine Palace. On the other side was Daozong Peak. The word Dao floated on Daozong Peak. The headmaster, Daozong Immortal, cultivated all the methods of the world and gathered vitality, soul, and spiritual force in one. It could be said that it was the most desirable peak for martial artists. Next to Daozong Peak was Xiantian Peak. The head of the peak, Xiantian Immortal, established himself with casting inscriptions. His means of refining weapons and magic treasures must be extremely terrifying. If a martial artist's talent was limited, how could they strengthen themselves? Of course, it was to obtain more powerful weapons. Therefore, many disciples of lower ranks would rush to Xiantian Peak. Compared with the second-rank and first-rank disciples, they naturally did not have a sense of superiority. They could only use the method of strengthening themselves with weapons. On the last peak, the word kill floated in bloody light. Qin Hao looked at it and his spirit trembled. It was as if evil spirits had invaded his body and destroyed him. This was the place where the Mizar battle monarch passed down the Tao. It was in charge of killing all the treacherous people in the world, killing all those who deserved to be killed. It was an extremely tyrannical method to enter the Emperor's Tao through killing. The path of cultivation in the 7 mountains was different. Disciples had to choose according to their talent. Once they entered the mountain, they could not change their path. In a short moment, the 700+ people were divided into 7 groups, each corresponding to one of the 7 peaks. Among these 7 groups, Daozong Peak had the most people, with more than 300 people. Next were Mizar Peak and Xiantian Peak. As for Yaoguang, Supreme Micro, Yunyi Peak, and the others, each peak only attracted 40 to 50 people, and even Yunyi Peak only attracted 20 disciples. After all, among the candidates there were very few alchemists, array masters, medicine masters, and musicians. The number of people who passed Fallen Emperor Bei's test was even fewer. Most of the warriors naturally wanted to cultivate Yuan Qi and Yuan Spirit. If it wasn't for the fact that Yunyi Peak was too deserted, a portion of these 20+ people wouldn't have come. It was only because there were too many disciples going to Daozong Peak that they chose Yunyi Peak. Martial artists were all very smart. Sometimes, having fewer people was also an advantage. Very good. Once you enter the mountain, you can't change your path. Next, if any of the peak masters want to accept personal disciples, you can start from the first-rank disciples. The majestic voice continued. Suddenly, Lei Jiao and the others were shocked. Personal disciples, they were actually accepted as personal disciples by the peak masters. It was too exciting. The other second-rank and third-rank disciples who had already stood in line looked at them with burning eyes. It was an honor to be accepted as a personal disciple by a peak master. Personal disciples were similar to biological sons and daughters. They didn't get the best, used the best, and learned the most profound emperor's art. It was really enviable. On my God-seeking herb platform, 2 disciples made the herb grow 8 feet tall. North Gate Xuanda, Tan Gung, are you willing to be my disciples? A powerful voice came from Supreme Micro Peak. Suddenly, the void trembled. I'm willing. North Gate Xuanda shuddered, and he fell to his knees in excitement. No need to bow. What about you, Tan Gung? The voice continued. I'm willing. Tan Gung bowed. All right, the 2 of you will be my personal disciples, said True Lord Taiwei. Supreme Micro's happy laughter came from Supreme Micro Peak. Changhe Lo, Mo Xian, Ning Tianxing, Su Jin, Lan Qingwu, are you willing to come to Yaoguang Peak and cultivate the art of music with me? An extremely beautiful female voice sounded. It was Yaoguang Peak's Yaoguang Peak. An empress expert. Her voice is so beautiful. The eyes of many warriors lit up. Naturally, there was no lack of powerful figures at the level of Great Empress in the Divine Palace. However, when they heard this extremely beautiful voice, they couldn't help but feel inexplicably excited. They really hoped to meet this Yao Guang immortal master. Of course, the disciples who had just entered the Divine Palace didn't dare to have any improper thoughts. They just admired her. I'm willing. As soon as the voice fell, 4 figures stood out. Changhe Lo, Mo Xian, and they practiced the zither. Naturally, they wouldn't miss the opportunity to become a personal disciple of the peak master. Su Jin and Lan Qingwu were also very talented musical instrument cultivators among the candidates. Su Jin's primary spirit was the flute, and Lan Qingwu's was the pipa. Although they were slightly weaker than Changhe Lo and Mo Xian, compared to the remaining candidates, they were many times stronger. Yaoguang Peak also noticed their achievements. However, Ning Tianxing didn't step out together with them. He was hesitating. His gaze fell on the central peak of the Divine Palace. He knew that that was where the Palace Master cultivated. His wish was to become a disciple of the Palace Master. Ning Tianxing, are you willing? Yaoguang Peak asked again. Although Ning Tianxing didn't give a response immediately, she still didn't want to miss it. After all, Ning Tianxing showed the great emperor's fortune on the emperor stage. His image mirror was 5 feet tall. Since he had the Guqin spirit, he was most suitable to be a disciple of Yaoguang Peak. Forgive me for being stupid. The art of music is too difficult. I can't bear it. Ning Tianqing thought about it again and decided to refuse. It doesn't matter, Yaoguang Peak said calmly. There was a hint of regret in her tone. How could a genius who showed the great emperor's fortune be a fool? It was just an excuse. Although it was a pity Yaoguang Peak wouldn't force him. Later, the 4 of you will enter Yaoguang Peak. Yes, master. Chang Hello and the other 4 said. Mo Xian glanced at Ning Tianqing. How could the prince of Mo Luo not see through Ning Tianqing's plan? Ning Tianqing refused Yaoguang Peak because he was clearly focused on the Divine Palace's main peak. Perhaps Ning Tianqing thought that only the palace master was worthy of being his master. After all, his talent was too strong. However, Mo Xian sneered inwardly. Comparing talent? Was he stronger than Qin Hao? If there was no Qin Hao, perhaps Ning Tianqing could try to enter the main peak. Now that there was a monster like Qin Hao, his wish was probably going to fall through. The palace master would also choose Qin Hao as his disciple. Daozong Peak cultivates the Tao of all things. Ordinary martial arts, Qi techniques, the power of the essence soul, and Qi techniques can all come here. An extremely old voice came from Daozong Peak. It was obvious that perfected Lord Daozong was not young. What was different was that perfected Lord Daozong didn't specifically point out the names of the first-rank disciples. He didn't take the initiative to invite them. Instead, he asked the most outstanding disciples to come by themselves. It was obvious how confident perfected Lord Daozong was. Disciple Shouwuk is willing to enter Daozong Peak. Shouwuk was the first to step forward. Yu Qianyang is willing to enter Daozong Peak. Yu Qianyang didn't want to fall behind. Although his results weren't perfect, he still received the first-rank disciple token. Since Shouwuk was going to Daozong Peak, he definitely had to go too. Jing Qinqi is willing to be a disciple of perfected Lord Daozong. Disciple Zhou Wudao is willing to enter Daozong Peak. Disciple Qianing is willing to enter Daozong Peak. Disciple Feng Qianli is willing to enter Daozong Peak. In an instant, everyone was fighting to be first. Just like the third-rank and second-rank disciples, the most outstanding disciples were also the ones who joined Daozong Peak. Agreed. Perfected Lord Daozong replied with a single word. After a pause, he seemed to have thought of something. His old voice continued. Xiao Han, Qingji Han, are you willing to be my disciples? Disciple. Xiao Han looked at Qin Hao. Qin Hao nodded. Disciple is willing. Xiao Han stepped out of the line and stood with Shouwuk and the others. Perfected Lord Daozong cultivated the Tao of all things. His research on essence, soul, and Qi was definitely extremely profound. The 7 Peaks was the most suitable place for Xiao Han to go. Ha ha ha, good. Qingji Han, what about you? Perfected Lord Daozong laughed happily. Disciple isn't willing. Qingji Han said coldly. She glanced at Xiao Han. If he hadn't spoken first, she might have considered joining Daozong Peak. Now that Xiao Han was going, Qingji Han wouldn't go with him. Princess. Mo Xian wanted to say something but stopped. He was afraid that Qingji Han would have the same idea as Ning Tianqing. However, how could the main peak of the Divine Palace be so easy to enter? If they agreed to perfected Lord Daozong's request, they would at least have a spot as a personal disciple. If they didn't agree, it would be too late to regret it. Han Qingji turned a blind eye to Mo Xian's anxiousness. Rotten wood can't be carved. In Daozong Peak, perfected Lord Daozong scolded without giving face. My Uni Peak cultivates the world Tao 10,000 formations. Just like Daozong Peak, anyone who cultivates formations can come here. Perfected Lord Uni's voice sounded. He didn't name anyone, but he didn't have as much confidence as perfected Lord Daozong. He probably thought that even if he named a disciple, they might not come. As expected, the scene was silent. No one responded to perfected Lord Uni. Although the other third-grade and second-grade disciples were anxious, the first-grade disciples with the highest talent were indeed unwilling to cultivate formations. A pitiful generation, a foolish generation. Perfected Lord Uni said angrily. Xiantian Peak accepts blacksmithing disciples. Mizar Peak accepts disciples. Next, the Xiantian deity lord and Mizar battle lord spoke. Their expressions were simple and crude. Surprisingly, the strongest blacksmith in the divine palace also had a female voice. Especially when the Xiantian deity lord's voice sounded, Qin Hao couldn't help but feel nervous. He seemed to have confirmed something. Disciple Haisha is willing to join Mizar Battle Palace. Disciple Lei Jiao is willing to join Mizar Battle Palace. Disciple Zhan Yi is willing to join Mizar Battle Palace. Mizar Battle Palace was in charge of killing. It was filled with violence and beauty. It specialized in physical combat. Haisha and Lei Jiao had long set their sights on joining Mizar Battle Palace. It was the same for Zhan Yi. Disciple Hao Zhixing is willing to join Mizar Battle Palace. Disciple Yi Yao is willing to join Mizar Battle Palace. Little Nine and Yi Yao said. Qin Yun and Aku had second-grade disciple tokens, but they were not fated to become the Peak Lord's disciples. Brother Melon. Qin Hao gestured at Xiaogua and pointed at Xiantian Peak. Disciple Xiaogua is willing to become Senior Xuantian's disciple. Xiaogua bowed in the direction of Xiantian Peak. At this moment, the first-grade disciples had all been selected. They had become the Peak Lord's personal disciples. The treatment they received was far better than second-grade and third-grade disciples. Of course, there were still 3 empty spots. They were Qin Hao, Ning Tianxing, and Qingji Han. Chapter 1430. Qin Hao looked at the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace. There were several extremely strong Emperor auras in each peak, and the peak masters who were transmitting voice transmissions were even more unfathomable. No matter which peak he entered to cultivate, opportunities could only be encountered by chance. The cultivation directions of the 7 peaks seemed to be different, but when cultivators stepped into the Emperor realm, their Tao techniques were similar. Emperor realm cultivators could see the mysteries of the great Tao of heaven and earth, while Emperor realm cultivators could borrow the power of the great Tao to suppress the common people. Qin Hao had obtained Lord Wu's inheritance, so Emperor realm Tao techniques were not important to him. He just needed to step into the Emperor realm. After all, the burning and meteorite laws had taken shape. With Denda's conditions, entering Tai Wei Peak was undoubtedly the most suitable. However, even if he went to Yaoguang Peak to cultivate music, Qin Hao would not reject it. For him, he only wanted to enter the Emperor realm. As for which peak he cultivated in, he was fine with it. Therefore, Qin Hao did not stand out like the others. He was not in a hurry to decide which peak he should go to. The strange thing was that during this period, none of the peak masters took the initiative to invite him. On the divine grass platform, Northgate Xuanda and Tangung only rose 8 feet. Qin Hao's nourishment of the divine grass reached the clouds. Perfected Lord Tai Wei should be more tempted. Not only the divine grass platform, but also the 5 arenas of fallen Emperor Bei were all created by Qin Hao. None of the peak masters took the initiative to invite him to their peak. Was it really like what black-robed Emperor Yuan said? Was Qin Hao's talent really unteachable? Ning Tianxing was the opposite of Qin Hao. Qin Hao was not picky and could go to any peak. Among these 6 peaks, Ning Tianxing did not like them. He longed to enter the Divine Palace's main peak and become the Palace Master's disciple. Qin Hao's talent was unparalleled, and he was the #1 conqueror. However, Ning Tianxing's talent was not bad either. He had the Emperor's providence and the power of 3 souls. Why couldn't he enter the Palace Master's sect? As for Qingji Han, she deliberately did not enter Daozong Peak because of her grudge with Xiao Han. perfected Lord Daozong's invitation was also decisively rejected by her. In order to vent his anger, he had missed the opportunity to become the Peak Master's disciple. Until now, she was suddenly at a loss, not knowing what to do next. I heard that among the disciples this time, there was a junior named Qin Hao who struck the drum 81 times and destroyed the drum platform. Stepping on the golden bell platform, the golden bell soared into the sky. Fusing 10 images into one, refining 10,000 arts into fire, divine grass into the clouds, its height could not be seen, fate did not appear, but the Emperor's mirror collapsed. Who is Qin Hao? At this moment, an extremely majestic voice came from the direction of the main peak. The voice was as loud as a heavenly bell, shaking the heavens and earth. It was as if the will of the heavens had invaded their minds, and no one could resist it. More than 700 people trembled at the same time. So strong, Xiaogua said. When his voice entered their ears, they felt as if their souls were being annihilated. I'm afraid that even the Peak Masters from earlier couldn't compare to the power contained in that voice. Yi Xuehan was secretly shocked. Among the 7 peaks, each peak had the aura of several emperors, and the cultivation of the Peak Masters was obviously above these emperors. And the majestic voice that came from the main peak was actually stronger than the Peak Masters. How terrifying was the heritage of the Divine Palace! Disciple Qin Hao greets the senior. Qin Hao took a step forward. Although he didn't know who the messenger was, since it came from the direction of the main peak, its identity must be extremely noble. In an instant, an invisible will enveloped his body, and Qin Hao felt as if he was being restrained. At this moment, he couldn't produce the slightest bit of strength. It was as if an invisible palm was choking his throat, and in just a few seconds, his hands were already sweating. Sure enough, you are talented. I am the Lord of the Divine Palace, Lord Migres. Qin Hao, are you willing to become the disciple of the old man? The will that suppressed the world disappeared, and the voice continued. The 700 disciples were shocked. The Lord of the Divine Palace? Among the 7 peaks, the peak in the center was Migres Peak. The Peak Master, Lord Migres, was also the Palace Lord in charge of everything in the Divine Palace. Moreover, he sent a voice transmission to accept Qin Hao as his disciple. Although many martial artists had guessed that this would happen, with Qin Hao's monstrous talent, he would definitely be noticed by the Palace Lord. If someone wanted to accept him as a disciple, it had to be the Lord of the Divine Palace. However, when it really happened, everyone still couldn't help but feel shocked. That couldn't be better. Qin Hao smiled helplessly. He had come to the Divine Palace with great difficulty, but no one wanted to accept him. Fortunately, someone had spoken, and the other party was the Lord of the Divine Palace. Realizing that he had lost his composure at this time, Qin Hao straightened his face, bowed and said, "Disciple is willing to enter the Migres Palace." Crack! Ning Tianqing seemed to hear a thunderclap in his ears. Sure enough, he chose Qin Hao first. After 1,000 years of silence, the Palace Lord also has the intention to accept a disciple. I had expected that he would accept Qin Hao, so I didn't invite him before. It's really a big loss for my Tai Wei Peak. An extremely helpless voice sounded at Tai Wei Peak. Isn't it also a loss for my Kai Yang Palace? In the void, Kai Yang Battle Lord's roar was like thunder. In fact, the 6 peak masters of the Divine Palace all had the intention of recruiting Qin Hao, but the main peak was bigger, and Migres Palace was the current lord of the Divine Palace, so they had to give it to him. What's more, even if they tried to snatch him, they wouldn't be able to. It seems that not all the best disciples of each session have the opportunity to become senior Migres's disciple. Zhou Wudao looked at Shou Wuk in amazement. Qin Hao is in luck, Shou Wuk said. Creak. Hearing the conversation between the two, Ning Tianqing secretly clenched his fists in the crowd. All kinds of signs indicated that Migres Palace's requirements for accepting a disciple were extremely harsh, and in 1,000 years, he had not accepted a single one. Now, Qin Hao had attracted the attention of Migres Palace Lord with his peerless talent and had become the Palace Lord's disciple. Then he didn't know if he, Crown Prince Ningwu, was qualified to impress the Divine Palace and become their second personal disciple. Chapter 1431. With this thought in mind, Ning Tianxing took a step forward, bowed, and said, "Disciple Ning Tianxing comes from an imperial family in the southern region. I have the fate of the great emperor and the power of 3 souls. I beg to enter Migres Peak and become a disciple of the palace master." Everyone looked at Ning Tianxing. He begged to enter Migres Peak and become the second personal disciple of the palace master. Although the palace master's requirements for accepting disciples were bound to be extremely harsh, with Crown Prince Ningwu's talent, he could give it a try. After all, among the signs, Ning Tianxing was indeed extremely strong, perhaps second only to Qin Hao. Xian also glanced at Ning Tianxing. So he spoke directly? And it was a plea. "My Migres Peak's imperial techniques are unfathomable and cannot be controlled without great perseverance. Since you come from an imperial family and can't endure hardships, it is obviously not suitable for you." Palace Master Migres transmitted his voice indifferently. These words were quite similar to the conversation between Ning Tianxing and Yaoguang Deity Lord. Yaoguang Deity Lord invited Ning Tianxing to enter Yaoguang Peak to practice music, but Ning Tianxing refused with the reason that music was difficult and he couldn't endure hardship. Now, Crown Prince Ningwu begged to enter Migres Peak, and true Lord Migres used this as an excuse to refuse Ning Tianxing. It was really the cycle of life and death. Ning Tianxing's face became extremely ugly. How should he answer? Should he say that this disciple can endure hardships without complaint? Once this sentence was said, it would undoubtedly offend Yaoguang Deity Lord. Of course, as a peak master of the Divine Palace, Yaoguang Deity Lord's tolerance was as vast as the sea. She might not really take it to heart, but the disciples of Yaoguang Peak would never let it go. Ning Tianxing already had the intention of belittling Yaoguang Peak, but the Peak Master didn't take it to heart. How could this disciple swallow this anger? If he offended a Peak disciple, his days in the Divine Palace would not be easy. At the very least, Xian's gaze towards Ning Tianxing had become much sharper. Moreover, above Xian, there was still the senior brother of the Yaoguang Peak from the previous world. For a moment, Ning Tianxing fell into an extremely awkward situation. "Don't worry about it. My Cloud Shift Peak cultivates the Tao of array formations. Normally, I'll just draw some talismans and use my Yuan Qi and Soul Force to form array diagrams. Although it consumes a bit of mental strength, it's not too much of a hardship. Why don't you come to my Cloud Shift Peak?" At this moment, Perfected Lord Yun Yi said generously. Ha ha! Xiaogua couldn't help but laugh out loud. Yun Yi Peak? The cultivation array. Not to mention the rank 2 disciples, even the rank 3 disciples were too lazy to go. This time, there were more than 700 martial artists, but only a little more than 20 of them entered Uni Peak. Moreover, they were the weakest among the rank 3 talent. Now, true Lord Cloudies had taken the initiative to invite Crown Prince Wu Ning, who possessed the Emperor's providence and the power of 3 souls. Ning Tianxing was really unlucky. Xiaogua wasn't the only one laughing. Shou Wuk, Zhou Wudao, and the others also unconsciously curled their lip. They wanted to see how Crown Prince Wu Ning would react, and whether he would accept or not. Or rather, whether he had the guts to reject Perfected Lord Cloudies again. After all, Ning Tianxing had already offended the Peak Master, Yaoguang Immortal Lord. "I'm willing to join Uni Peak." With endless frustration, Ning Tianxing hardened his heart and nodded. Since Palace Lord Migres had already rejected him, he had no chance of joining Yaoguang Peak. Although Uni Peak was slightly inferior and Ning Tianxing didn't understand array formation, he would still be a peak master's disciple after agreeing. At the very least, his status would be higher than a rank 3 disciple. It was also old man Yun Yi's fault. Why did he have to step forward himself? It would have been better if he had switched peak masters. At this moment, Ning Tianxing looked at Mizar Palace with a strong desire. Ha ha ha, good. I'll accept you as my good disciple. Perfected Lord Cloudies let out an extremely carefree laugh. When it entered Ning Tianxing's ears, he felt as if the world was spinning. Qingji Han, my Yaoguang Peak has a meditation sutra. Although it doesn't have a strong offensive power, this mental cultivation technique can resist the invasion of all sounds in the world, slay one's inner demons, refine one's Tao heart, and purify one's soul. Are you willing to join me? An extremely beautiful and gentle voice came from Yaoguang Peak. Qingji Han shuddered and immediately said in joy, I'm willing to join Yaoguang Peak. Resist the invasion of all sounds, slay one's inner demons, refine one's Tao heart, and purify one's soul. This was an extremely powerful mental cultivation technique. It could be said to be the natural enemy of all martial artists who attacked using music. Once the meditation sutra was used, all sounds would die down. Moreover, it could slay one's inner demons and help a martial artist enter the Emperor's Tao. Clearly, it wasn't as weak as Yaoguang Immortal Lord had said. It was most likely the ultimate technique of Yaoguang Peak. Meditation Sutra. Qin Hao murmured and looked at Yaoguang Peak. If there was a chance, he would have to pay a visit to Senior Yaoguang. The ceremony to enter the peak is over. The disciples of each peak will enter their respective dojos. Those who are not from the peak are not allowed to privately impart their technique. Violators will be expelled from the Divine Palace. Qin Hao, come to the Migres Palace. True Lord Migres ordered sternly. Immediately, a beam of light flew from the direction of Migres Peak. It was extremely fast and arrived in front of Qin Hao in the blink of an eye. Qin Hao looked over and saw that it was a futon. Was he going to sit on it? That was probably it. Qin Hao lifted the corner of his clothes and sat down. Immediately, the futon carried him straight to Migres Peak. The palace lord's disciple is indeed different. He came specifically to pick me up. Lei Jiao stared and then looked at the Mazang Hall that was 10,000 meters high in the clouds. At this time, he was at the foot of the mountain. A winding path extended to the top of Mazang Peak. He didn't know how long it would take to walk. Not only Mazang Palace but the other 6 palaces were also like this. Flying in the air? Would the Divine Palace allow it? No one dared to try. After all, it was the first day of school. Who knew if flying in the sky would violate the rules? Qin Hao was lucky. True Lord Migres threw out a grass ball and picked him up. Let's go too. Shouwuk smiled. Together with Zhou Wudao, Xiao Han, and the others, they climbed Daozong Peak step by step. At this moment, it really felt like they were wholeheartedly seeking the Tao. Ning Tianxing looked at Uni Peak. Even though he was extremely unwilling, he obediently took a step forward. Every step was incomparably heavy. Qingji Han, Mo Xian, and Changhe Lo went to Yaoguang Peak. Tan Gung, Northgate Xuanda, and a group of pharmacists and alchemists went to Taiwei Peak. Xiaogua went to Xiantian Peak. The Divine Palace's search for the Tao of Emperors began today. In the air, Qin Hao sat on a praying mat as he sped through the air. Very soon, he arrived at the Migres Great Hall. Stepping down, he saw a jade palace with immortal qi swirling around it. It was as sacred and dignified as an immortal palace, giving people an intense feeling of worship. In my previous life, I stepped into the peak of the 3rd realm of the Great Emperor realm. People said that I was invincible. However, the Divine Palace's powerhouses had not appeared yet. Qin Hao respected the Divine Palace. It was a place that people yearned for and feared. If the Divine Palace entered the world, no empire would be able to withstand its attack. Now, He had stepped in front of the Migres hall and officially become a disciple of the divine palace. Moreover, he was the disciple of the palace lord. It could be said that he had fulfilled a wish of his previous life. I wonder what realm of the great emperor realm Master Migres's cultivation has reached. Qin Hao was a little excited as he stepped in. The Migres hall was very grand, but it was also very cold. When Qin Hao walked in, there was no grand scene of disciples standing in 2 rows in the hall to welcome him. He smiled in his heart. Master Migres's requirements for accepting disciples were indeed extremely harsh. He was afraid that he would be the only disciple of the Migres hall. Although there were no disciples of Lord Migres in the hall, there were 2 figures sitting cross-legged in meditation. Both of them had their eyes closed, as if they did not notice Qin Hao's arrival. The person on the left was wearing a purple robe and a laurel crown. He had white hair and a youthful face, and his whole body was full of celestial qi. Judging from his snow-white hair and unfathomable aura, he was at least 1,000 years old. However, his appearance was not much older than Qin Hao. He also looked like a young man. The person on the right was much older. Although his hair was black and shiny, his face was full of wrinkles. Compared with the clothes of the celestial saint youth on the left, this elder's clothes were simply too shabby. He was wearing plain cotton clothes from head to toe, and an inconspicuous gray rope was wrapped around his waist. However, his aura was also unfathomable. For a moment, Qin Hao was stumped. Which one was Lord Migres? Disciple Qin Hao greets Master. After thinking about it, Qin Hao walked in front of the old man in plain cotton clothes and slowly cupped his hands in greeting. Junior brother, you have mistaken me for someone else. We are both disciples of the Migres hall. I am your senior brother, Chang Yu. The old man slowly opened his eyes and smiled kindly. Ahem, senior brother's aura is as deep as the abyss. When you sit here, you give people a feeling of boundless. My cultivation is low, and I am new here. I was shocked by senior brother for a moment. Don't blame me, don't blame me. Qin Hao was incomparably embarrassed. Junior brother, you are modest. To be able to enter Master's eyes, your talent will definitely reach my level in the future. Senior brother Chang Yu smiled. I will try my best. Qin Hao scratched his head and immediately looked at the young man on the left. He could not help but feel surprised. Master Migres, it can't be him, right? You really can't judge a book by its cover. I didn't expect Master to be so greedy and maintain his appearance so well. Qin Hao moved a few steps to the left and bowed to the young man with cupped fists. Disciple Qin Hao greets Master Migres. Junior brother, don't play with me. Since Chang Yu and I are sitting together, we are both disciples of the Migres hall. My name is Eastern Sky, and I am your senior brother. Chang Yu is your second senior brother. The young man said helplessly and fiercely glanced at old Chang Yu next to him. Since this old thing opened his mouth to explain, why didn't he also explain his identity? If this was discovered by the old man behind, he would think that Eastern Sky wanted to replace him as the master of the divine palace. Qin Hao was stunned. The young man with white hair and a ruddy complexion was also just a disciple of the Migres hall. He originally thought that Migres Lord had no disciples, but 2 suddenly appeared. Moreover, the aura of these 2 people was unfathomable. Standing in front of them, even Qin Hao and Denda's spiritual senses were also strongly oppressed. This proved that the 2 senior brothers in front of him were not much inferior to Qin Hao in his previous life. On the other hand, they were merely disciples of true Lord Migres. How powerful was true Lord Migres himself? What are you shouting about? At this time, a loud voice like a bell came. Qin Hao trembled and immediately recognized that it was the voice that came from Migres Peak when he was at the foot of the mountain. At that time, being suppressed by that will, Qin Hao could not summon the slightest strength to resist. It was extremely terrifying. Chapter 1432. At this time, an old man walked out from the back of the main hall. His hair was like stars, and he was hale and hearty. He stopped in front of Qin Hao with his hands behind his back. The old man looked ordinary, but he had the aura of a vast abyss, giving people a sense of awe. At a glance, one could tell that his cultivation was monstrous, and he was definitely not to be trifled with. Standing face to face with him, one had the illusion of looking up at a giant mountain. "Master! Master!" Eastern Sky and Chang Yu got up and greeted respectfully. Qin Hao reacted. The old man was the master of the Divine Palace. He saluted and said, "Disciple Qin Hao greets Master Migres. My appearance is different from what you imagined. Are you disappointed?" Palace Master Migres smiled. "It is indeed a little different. As the ancients say, what is concentrated is the essence. Master is in charge of the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, the master of the continent's highest academy, and your talent is unrivaled throughout history. You have the mandate of heaven above and suppress the common people below. Isn't it an insult to judge Master by his appearance? For an expert like Master who knows the heavens and the earth, you've long viewed looks as dirt. Disciple believes that even the most handsome man in the world would feel ashamed of his inferiority in front of Master and would be unable to indulge him." Qin Hao said sincerely. Eastern Sky and Chang Yu couldn't help but reveal a surprised look. This little brother was amazing. "Ha ha! Boy, you have a clever mouth. Not only is your talent monstrous, but your tongue is also so powerful. It suits old man's temperament very well." Palace Master Migres laughed heartily. He greatly admired his disciple's first impression. He said, "Save the compliments for later. Let's eat one bite at a time. Listen to everything in one go. In the future, if I want to hear more, what should I do if I can't hear it?" Palace Master Migres glanced at Eastern Sky and Chang Yu. These 2 blockheads, who had been in the sect for 1,000 years, were not as comfortable as his little disciple's words. Eastern Sky and Chang Yu blushed with shame. They didn't expect their master to like this. It was really vulgar. How could that be? If Shizhuan wants to hear it, I'll recite it for you every day. I'll recite it once for breakfast, once for lunch, and once for dinner. If Shizhuan doesn't mind, we can even add a midnight snack." Qin Hao leaned forward with a smile and leaned down to massage Palace Master Migres' shoulders. Eastern Sky and Chang Yu looked at each other, both with contempt. "Ha ha ha, you little guy. Migres there." With the balance of power behind him, Migres enjoyed it very much. Each peak master of the Divine Palace's 7 peaks was good at different cultivation directions. Migres' peak gathered the strengths of the 7 peaks, and the palace master was proficient in all of them. He was truly worthy of being the palace master. Cough, cough. Master has many tricks up his sleeve. Junior brother will know in the future. Dong Tianyi spoke, his tone filled with deep meaning. Palace Master Migres glared at Dong Tian and waved his hand to signal Qin Hao to stop. He turned around and said, "Qin Hao, I already know of your results in the Fallen Emperor Bei test." The war drums sounded 81 times, the golden bell soared into the sky, and the refining of 10,000 methods into one. Even among the previous disciples of the Divine Palace, where geniuses are as common as clouds, such abilities are rare. You are the only one who has broken 5 record. I am very lucky to have accepted a disciple like you. Master, you are too kind. It is my blessing to be your disciple." Qin Hao said. Palace Master Migres waved his hand. "Your abilities are ever-changing, but in the path of cultivation, there is still a distinction between primary and secondary. Migres Hall can only give you guidance. As for how good your future is, it will depend on your own performance. How about this, you go and rest first, ease your fatigue, and when you have enough energy, we will decide the direction of your emperor's path tomorrow." "Everything is arranged by Master," Qin Hao said. After months of tempering in the Imperial Bay, he was indeed a little tired. Migres nodded. Chang Yu, take your junior brother to his residence, and prepare some recovery pills. Yes, master. Chang Yu led the way for Qin Hao. I will go too. Eastern Sky eagerly followed, afraid that he would be assigned a cultivation task if he stayed. Qin Hao sighed. His two senior brothers were too enthusiastic. He thought that the Divine Palace had strict rules, but when he arrived at Migres Palace, he felt the warmth of home. Master and his two senior brothers were so approachable, without the slightest arrogance of a powerhouse. At the back of the main hall, there were several pavilions. Eastern Sky and Chang Yu led Qin Hao into one of the pavilions. Eastern Sky said, Junior brother, this will be your personal cultivation residence in the future. The one next door is your second senior brother Chang Yu, and the back is my cultivation place. The last one in Migres Palace is Master's cultivation place. Sorry to trouble you, senior brothers. There is another pavilion to my right. Whose is it? Qin Hao said. There were 4 pavilions behind Migres Palace. Well, Eastern Sky and Chang Yu's expressions froze, and sorrow inadvertently flowed in their eyes. They forced a smile and said, It's empty. Don't worry about it. If you encounter any obstacles in your cultivation, you can first ask your second senior brother for help. If you can't solve it, then come to me. If I can't solve it, then I will trouble Master. In short, this will be your home in the future. Don't feel constrained. Eastern Sky and Chang Yu had both entered the Great Emperor realm. Their cultivation was not as simple as the first realm. It was more than enough for them to guide Qin Hao, an Emperor realm cultivator. By the way, junior brother, these pills are for you. Embark on the Emperor's road and enter the Divine Palace. You need heavenly treasures to nourish your body. Like Qin Hao, Chang Yu had followed a large group of candidates to the Divine Palace. He understood the difficulties of the journey best. Eastern Sky was the same. The two of them were in the same bat. Among the thousands of geniuses in that batch, Eastern Sky was ranked second while Chang Yu was ranked fifth. Chang Yu opened his palm. With a flash of brilliance, several pill bottles appeared in his palm. He bent over and placed them in the room. And this? It's our first time meeting. I don't have anything good to give you. Junior brother, please don't mind. Chang Yu smiled and took out a stalk of immortal herb. New August 1st Chinese Network. Calm, 5-colored Emperor Net Immortal. Qin Hao looked at it and was shocked. The immortal herb in Chang Yu's hand glowed with a 5-colored halo. A vast amount of spiritual energy flowed out. It was an emperor-grade spiritual material that was almost extinct on the continent. The 5-colored Emperor Net Immortal was an immortal material that had a high chance of helping an Emperor Realm cultivator enter the Great Emperor Realm. Its effect might not be as great as the Deep-Sea Jade Dragon Pearl, but its function was the same. He never thought that there would be an Emperor-grade spiritual material in the Divine Palace. This is too precious. I can't accept it without doing anything. No. Qin Hao hurriedly refused. Chang Yu had given him an Emperor-grade spiritual material. If it appeared in the outside world, it would cause a war between great emperors. Junior brother, just accept it. I stole it from Taiwei Peak. If Uncle Master Taiwei knows it's here, it'll ruin everything. I've been hiding it for a long time. I'm giving it to you today as a gift. Don't be shy. However, this 5-colored Emperor Net Immortal is the only one that has grown in the Divine Palace for thousands of years. Eastern Sky sighed. Junior brother, eldest senior brother and I have reached the Great Emperor Realm. We've been in the Divine Palace for hundreds of years and don't have much time left. We might have to leave in 3 to 5 years. This 5-colored Emperor Net Immortal is useless to us. Take it, Chang Yu said and handed it to Qin Hao. Well, senior brother, you're the best. Qin Hao really needed the 5-colored Emperor Net Immortal. Why did he enter the Divine Palace? He didn't seek the Great Emperor Realm. He only wanted to enter the great emperor realm as soon as possible. Only then could he return to the southern region, destroy Xianyuan, take the Cosmos soil, and save Lin Feng. Moreover, the war in the northern frontier required his and Xiao Han's strength. You're my junior brother. If I don't treat you well, who should I treat well? Chang Yu was quite happy to see Qin Hao accept the gift. Now, the five-colored Emperor Net Immortal was finally put to use. Although it wasn't in her hands, giving it to her junior brother who had just arrived could be considered a wish. If she were still alive, she would definitely agree. Chapter 1433. Leaving the five-colored Emperor Net Immortal behind, Dong Tian and Chang Yu left the pavilion to avoid disturbing Qin Hao's rest. Looking at the elixir bottles on the table, and the five-colored immortal herb in his hand, Qin Hao truly felt a strong warmth. In the outside sect, in order to gain the favor of the elders and obtain cultivation resources, which disciple did not desperately show off their abilities, deceiving and scheming against each other, and even killing each other behind their backs? Although there were only 4 people in the Migres Palace, it reflected the sincere friendship of the same sect. On the first day of entering, the 2 senior brothers treated Qin Hao like an elder brother. Senior brothers have something on their minds, I wonder who they left the immortal herb for. Qin Hao put the 5-colored immortal herb into the space ring, waved at the table, and grabbed several elixir bottles in his hand, and walked to the bedroom. After rushing all the way to the fallen Emperor Bei and experiencing several months of cruel training, his body, mind, and spirit needed to be adjusted. Then, he had to strive to enter the Emperor realm. In the Divine Palace, the spiritual energy was rich and majestic, and with the elixir provided by Taiwei Peak, the peak masters and elders of the various peaks guided the disciples to enter the Emperor realm. Such a strong teaching force was far from what the outside sect or family could compare to. It was no wonder that the Divine Palace was praised by the world as the Holy Land for cultivating the Emperor realm. Lying on the bed, Qin Hao quickly entered the dreamland. His body and will relaxed, and the spiritual energy around Migres Peak turned into thousands of wisps and rushed over, penetrating his skin and gathering in his sea of qi, nourishing his lost vitality. After taking the elixir given by senior brother Chang Yu, Qin Hao was recovering to his peak state at an astonishing speed. The next day, the morning bell of the Divine Palace rang, and the 7 peaks became active. On the first day of school, the peak masters set up a training ground to preach, but the disciples of the other peaks were not allowed to listen in on the 7 peaks, so as to avoid learning too much and affecting the direction of the Emperor realm. Migres Peak. Qin Hao washed up and went to the Migres Palace from the pavilion. Lord Migres once said that today, he would determine the direction of the Emperor realm for Qin Hao, and he must not let the master and other disciples, as that would be too rude. According to what Li Wanji said, his enchantment techniques came from Empress Xiantian, and Empress Xiantian came from the Divine Palace. On the way, Qin Hao pondered as he walked, his expression solemn. Entering the Divine Palace and stepping into the Divine Emperor realm was only one of his goals. In addition, there was another important task. Li Wanji asked him to investigate the cause of Empress Xuantian's death. Yesterday, the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace were selecting disciples. The peak master of Xiantian Peak was Lord Xiantian, who was good at inscriptions, which coincided with the emperor technique that Li Wanji's master, Empress Xiantian, was good at. It was certain that Empress Xiantian came from the Xiantian Peak. She might even be the previous lord of Xiantian. The Divine Palace has a long history, and the peak masters of the 7 peaks are the pillars of the Divine Palace. Presumably, the previous peak masters respected their titles. When the old peak master retired, the new peak master would inherit the title of the old peak master and become the new sect master. Qin Hao knew very well that the older the sect and family, the more they paid attention to etiquette, because etiquette was where the soul was, and it was a kind of belief and symbol that could not be trampled or abandoned. Then, could Lord Xiantian, the peak master of Xiantian Peak, be the disciple of Empress Xiantian, who died in the hidden dragon's secret realm? The disciple killed the master and took the power of the peak? The thought flashed through his mind, but Qin Hao directly rejected this guess. There was no evidence, and it was too arbitrary. It was not so easy to kill a great emperor, unless one party had overwhelming power. But who dared to say that they could crush a great emperor? Moreover, a battle broke out in the emperor realm, and the scene was so shocking that it was impossible for the other peak masters to not notice it. Taking a step back, even if he killed Empress Xiantian with a sneak attack, the disappearance of the old peak master was something that immortal Migres, the master of the divine palace, would have to investigate. The death or disappearance of a peak master of the divine palace was not a trivial matter, and it was enough to shake the foundation of the divine palace. But according to the atmosphere of the divine palace yesterday, everything was normal, and the relationship between the peak masters was very close. Could it be that because the matter of Empress Xiantian was too long ago, the divine palace had already solved it? No matter what, since I promised Li Wanji, I have to check it out. Otherwise, I would be sorry for the dragon spirit Dharma form he gave me. Fortunately, I let Guadi enter the Xiantian Peak in advance, and become a disciple of the Xiantian Peak. With him there, I can find an excuse to visit Lord Xiantian. Qin Hao nodded and stepped into the Migres palace. Although the 7 peaks were connected, they also had sectarian views and did not exclude each other. Everything was for the good of the disciples of the divine palace. If there was no one familiar with Xiantian Peak, Qin Hao would not be able to go there easily. When he came to the palace, it was extremely quiet. Everyone thought that the 7 peaks of the divine palace had the least disciples of Elixir Peak. But they didn't know that the worst was Migres Peak, with only 4 teachers and disciples in one peak. Today was even more ridiculous. There was no one in the palace, and even Senior Brother Eastern Sky and Senior Brother Chong Yu were nowhere to be found. No way. Qin Hao felt a headache. On the first day of the preaching, he was the only one left in one peak. "Oh, you're up, how's your recovery?" A voice as loud as a bell came, and the hale and hearty Lord Migres appeared in the palace, as if he had been waiting for a long time. "Good morning, Master. Migres Peak is full of spirit energy, and with the elixir given by Senior Brother, disciples' fatigue was swept away overnight, and I feel unprecedentedly energetic." Qin Hao walked with a strong and powerful gait. "I asked him to give it to you, you don't have to thank Chong Yu." "Oh right, why didn't you go to other peaks to listen?" Lord Migres said. "Go to other peaks to listen?" Qin Hao felt a little baffled. "Didn't Master say that today is the day to determine the cultivation direction of the Emperor's path? The cultivation direction is not urgent. Every time a new disciple enters the divine palace, each peak must set up a training ground, and the peak master will personally preach for 7 days. It can be said that time is precious, and can be said to be the most enlightening 7 days in a disciple's life. Our Migres Peak is the same. According to the rules, we preach for 7 days. However, my way is different from other peak masters. I don't teach, you go to other peaks to learn. Go wherever you want and listen to whichever peak master is good. No matter which peak, they will not drive away the disciples of Migres Peak. Your 2 senior brothers have probably left long ago. Didn't they tell you yesterday?" Lord Migres also felt very puzzled. It was an old rule, why didn't Qin Hao understand? Qin Hao suddenly felt that the old man in front of him was extremely black-bellied and unscrupulous. He was worlds apart from Master Migres, who said that he was proficient in everything. It turned out that the so-called music, formations, refining, alchemy, and offensive techniques were all taught by others. And Lord Migres himself did not teach. "What, you still don't understand?" Lord Migres asked. "I go to other peaks to listen?" Qin Hao said. "Yes." None of the peaks will drive you away? They have the guts, unless they don't want to stay in the divine palace. Lord Migres said with incomparable pride. Qin Hao secretly clenched his fist. If he had known earlier, he would not have let Xiaogua go to Xiantian Peak. Anyway, no matter which peak the disciples of Migres' palace went to, they would not be driven away. It turned out that this was the treatment of a disciple of the palace master. Disciple will take his leave. Qin Hao turned around and ran out. 7 days, 7 precious days. Don't worry, you can only get the recognition of the peak masters if you wear the uniform of a disciple of Migres' palace. Otherwise, you will be beaten. Lord Migres finally remembered the most important thing and hurriedly threw a set of clothes at Qin Hao. Qin Hao did not even look at it. He caught it in his arms and soared into the sky. The praying mat that carried him yesterday turned into a halo and appeared under his feet. Then, a long stream of light pierced through the sky and disappeared in the direction of Xiantian Peak. You're really impatient. You didn't even put it on. Let me see if it fits. I'm waiting for you to praise my craftsmanship. Lord Migres shook his head. It should be known that this set of clothes was made by him. It was excellent and mainly green, symbolizing hope. Unfortunately, Chong Yu and Eastern Sky did not know the quality of the clothes and did not wear it because they thought it was too ugly. Just now, in order to scare Qin Hao, they told him that he had to wear the clothes to get the recognition of the peak masters. In fact, no disciple had ever worn this set of clothes, and Qin Hao was about to become the first. Chapter 1434. Holding the uniform given by true Lord Migres, Qin Hao stepped on the futon and flew straight to Xiantian Peak. The 7 peaks of the Divine Palace preached for 7 days each, which was extremely important for the disciples' cultivation. As a member of Migres Peak, true Lord Migres actually wanted Qin Hao to go to another peak to listen, directly passing the responsibility of teaching to others. Although this behavior was too immoral in the current situation, it was not a bad thing. With the title of Palace Master's personal disciple on his head, no matter which peak Qin Hao went to listen to teachings, he would not be excluded and would enjoy the treatment of all peak masters' personal disciples. In other words, the rules of the Divine Palace were ineffective on him. No wonder senior brother Eastern Sky said that Master has a lot of means, so that's what he meant. At this moment, in retrospect, Eastern Sky's words were not a compliment. No wonder Master Migres scolded Eastern Sky to shut up at that time. Holding the uniform in his arms, Qin Hao raised his gloves and put them on. If he did not wear the Migres Hall uniform, he would not be recognized by the peak masters, which was very serious. But as soon as he put it on, he immediately regretted it. Who designed the clothes? It's too ugly. Opening his arms, Qin Hao looked at himself. The clothes were a long robe, dyed green, like a big tree leaf, and the lower part of the robe was wide, like a woman's skirt. What's more, there was a chrysanthemum embroidered on the chest, yellow and orange printed on the chest, incomparably blooming, dazzling like a small sun. Not only was there a chrysanthemum on the chest, but there was also a chrysanthemum on the back. In the middle of the chrysanthemum, there was the word "Power" of the Migres Hall, which looked majestic and had the power to swallow heaven and earth. This was probably the most useful symbol of the clothes. Alas! With a sigh, Qin Hao waved his hand and swept out a splash of water in front of him. In the void, the rippling water reflected his figure like a mirror. Looking at himself in the reflection of the water, Qin Hao felt that he was like a big walking leaf or a praying mantis that was about to fly. He couldn't be more ugly. As for the green hat in his hand, Qin Hao kept it in his spatial ring and refused to wear it no matter what. He thought about it and decided to leave it to the old demon. After all, the second master always had a green soul cap condensed from his soul power. When he returned, he would say that it was a treasure he had brought out from the celestial palace and gave it to the old demon as a gift. Who knows, the old demon might be so moved that he would cry and be willing to sacrifice his life for him. With a faint smile, Qin Hao put away the tranquil water. The water in front of him flowed like a small stream into his fingertips. With his hands behind his back, he stepped on the praying mat and approached Xiantian Peak. Although his clothes were a little ugly with them, he wouldn't be chased out by the elders of Xiantian Peak. The 7 peaks of the celestial palace were huge and majestic. If a mortal were to walk between the peaks, it would be difficult to finish one peak in a day. However, if one were to fly, this distance was nothing. Soon, he arrived at Xiantian Peak. Qin Hao was ready to put away the praying mat and land. After all, if he flew directly to Xiantian Hall, it would be disrespectful to the Xiantian deity. Even as a disciple of the master of the celestial palace, he still had to be respectful in front of a senior. However, a shocking force suddenly surged from behind him. The force stirred up spatial turbulence, and it swept out like a monstrous gale. A raging force surged over, and even though Qin Hao had stepped into the Emperor realm, he was like a mantis trying to stop a chariot, and he was immediately blasted far away. Buzz! The space trembled. A beautiful figure with long hair fluttering in the wind stood on a flying sword and disappeared in the direction of Daozong Peak. The great Emperor realm. Qin Hao was shocked. It took him a lot of effort to calm down. The other party ran rampant in the celestial palace's peak. Even if she was a great emperor, she was too domineering. Moreover, she flew directly to Daozong Peak on her flying sword. Did she have no respect for Lord Daozong at all? Which peak is she from? She's even more domineering than the disciples of my Migres palace. Qin Hao looked at the disappearing figure. Judging from her figure, she was a female disciple. Normally, Qin Hao wouldn't care. However, he was suddenly attacked. The other party knew that a weak Emperor Realm disciple was flying in the air in front of her. She deliberately released her Emperor Realm Yuan Qi. What was the difference between an emperor and a primitive emperor? It was a small matter if he was accidentally injured, but it could be fatal. Qin Hao opened his red lotus fire pupil. His gaze pierced through the clouds and landed on Daozong Peak. No matter who she was, it was fine if she provoked others. However, since she took the initiative to provoke him, he had to get an explanation. Otherwise, he would be letting down Master Migres, the master of the celestial palace. Following the other party's aura, Qin Hao accurately captured the figure of the woman walking on Daozong Peak. However, he couldn't help but be surprised when he saw her. The woman was also wearing the Migres Palace's uniform that looked like a large leaf. She walked like a flying mantis. Behind her, a heavenly chrysanthemum bloomed, revealing an eye-catching authority character. She's from the Migres Palace. No wonder she was so arrogant. It turned out that she was from the same sect. Qin Hao smiled, and the sullenness in his heart was swept away. She should be my senior sister. However, why didn't I meet her before? Qin Hao felt a little strange at this time. Although he was the youngest disciple, on the first day he entered the sect, senior brothers Eastern Sky, Chang Yu and Master were all present. Since Master was there, why wasn't she? Also, senior brother Eastern Sky said that there were a total of 3 disciples in the Migres Palace, including Qin Hao. They lived in the 3 pavilions at the back of the palace, and the pavilion at the back was where Master rested. That's not right. Qin Hao suddenly remembered that there was another pavilion besides the 3 of them. It was right next to Qin Hao's pavilion. He specifically asked senior brother Eastern Sky, and Eastern Sky said that it was empty. What's going on? It was clear that there were only 3 disciples in the Migres Palace. At this time, Qin Hao encountered a senior sister wearing the same uniform. Could it be that senior brother Eastern Sky deliberately deceived him and wanted to give him a surprise? Chapter 1435. Translator. Nyoibo Studio Editor. Nyoibo Studio First seat Tian K. Chin Hao's lips curled up. If Tian K wanted to draw his attention and lure senior sister to Daozong Peak, then senior brother Eastern Sky would be gravely mistaken. My will is firm. How can I be seduced by a woman? Chin Hao proudly rolled up his sleeves. Floating light flashed beneath his feet as he landed on Xiantian Peak. Xiantian Peak. A majestic ancient temple stood on the peak. Below the ancient temple, there were several palaces on both sides. One side was where the disciples lived, while the other was where the elders rested. Each of the 7 peaks of the divine palace had a different environment. Take Xiantian Peak, for example. The peak was highly evaporated, like a furnace. Burning furnaces could be seen everywhere, as well as forging weapons and rare ores. Today, the profound Heaven Immortal Lord was teaching here, and the training ground was set up below the ancient temple. At this time, the Xiantian training ground was a grand scene. More than 100 furnaces were arranged in a very orderly manner. Beside each furnace, there was a disciple guarding it. The disciples held casting hammers in their hands and hammered them down one after another. Some of them were hammering the ores to remove the impurities in the ores, while others were urging the soul fire with their palms to smelt the metal in the furnace. The sound of hammering iron and the sound of burning could be heard incessantly. Under the shroud of the high temperature, more than 100 disciples of Mysterious Sky Palace were sweating profusely, but they were still very busy. Xiaogua was among the disciples. His furnace was at the front of the formation. After all, he was the only personal disciple of the profound Heaven Immortal Lord among this batch of candidates. He was the focus of training. At this time, Chin Hao landed on Xiantian Peak. The familiar aura naturally attracted Xiaogua's attention. Big brother, why are you here? Xiaogua was pleasantly surprised. He threw away the forging hammer in his hand and turned to greet Tian Quebec. At this moment, countless eyes followed Xiaogua. The person who greeted the Peak Lord's personal disciple naturally attracted the attention of the disciples of Xiantian Hall. When they saw Chin Hao, everyone was stunned for a moment. Chin Hao. Gu Kuei was very surprised. Yesterday, Chin Hao was chosen by the Divine Palace Lord and taken to Migres Palace. Why would he come here today? This was not surprising. However, as a member of Migres Palace, coming to Xiantian Peak was clearly a violation of the rules. The 7 peaks had forbidden people from other peaks from entering except for the disciples of their own peak. This was a ban personally issued by the Lord of the Divine Palace. Chin Hao had violated the rules. I came to see my brother. Chin Hao looked at Gu Kuei, the Divine Palace Lord. Studio Gu Kuei was Mo was. Studio Gu Kuei, and Mo was Yang Tian Quebec. Gu Qing time. He was Tian Mo Lord. Studio was to Chern Studio Tian Studio to Studio Quebec Lu Studio Tian. Level Sect. Gu. Tian Sect. Tian Sect Sect Tian was Tian Yi. Was. K. Gu Kuei had sounded the drum 7 times during the test at Emperor's Bay. He was only a second-class disciple, and was not accepted as a personal disciple. Now, he was under Xiantian Celestial Lord to learn the art of forging. The Palace Lord has ordered that non-disciples are not allowed to enter other peaks, Gu Kuei said coldly. This is the rule. When the rules were mentioned, Qi Xiaogua's expression turned serious. She looked at Chin Hao with a worried expression. Big brother, we are learning the art of forging. Let's talk about it another day. Chin Hao had asked him to enter Xiantian Peak for a reason. However, Xiaogua did not want Chin Hao to violate the rules on the first day of school. It's fine. I asked you to come because... Chin Hao smiled. He was about to explain that he could learn forging with Xiaogua. You think it's fine just because you say so? Even if you are the Palace Lord's disciple, you can't be so lawless, right? Several figures walked over and stood in front of Qin Hao and Xiaogua. Xian Yuan Di interrupted Qin Hao. Which eye of yours saw that I am lawless? Qin Hao did not have a good impression of the Xian Yuan family. In other words, if this was not Xian Tian Peak, Xian Yuan Di would not be able to survive in front of him. Oh, you are indeed different after becoming the palace lord's disciple. Your arrogance and tone have become so big. Another Xian Yuan family member sneered. The palace lord's rules are so clear. As a disciple, you dare to defy it so brazenly. Are you looking down on Xian Tian Palace because you have the support of Migres Palace? Qin Hao, I think you are here to pick a fight, a Xian Yuan family youth holding a forging hammer said fiercely. Scram, Qin Hao said sharply. His good mood was ruined by the few pieces of rat dung in front of him. You still dare to scold us? Do you really think Xian Tian Palace is easy to bully? Senior brothers, come and take a look. This person is a new disciple who entered Migres Palace yesterday and was accepted as a personal disciple by the Migres Palace Lord. However, he relied on his special status to defy the rules and deliberately run over to Xiantian Peak to behave atrociously. Why are you talking nonsense with him? This is intolerable. You should be the one to scram. The Xianyuan family youth holding a forging hammer exchanged glances with Xianyuan Di and the others. At the same time, 5 streams of Yuan Qi were released. 3 sovereigns and 2 venerables. 3 rulers and 2 peak Yuan venerate. The 5 of them did not allow any explanation. They immediately made a move after placing the blame on Qin Hao. Of course, given the unparalleled strength Qin Hao had displayed in Dilua Bay, the 5 of them knew that they had no chance of winning. Even though Xianyuan Di's cultivation base was 1 level higher than Qin Hao's, he was still no match for him. Even Shou Wuk and Ning Tianxing might not necessarily be able to defeat Qin Hao. However, they still made a move. This was Xiantian Peak, and everyone present was a disciple of Xiantian Palace. They were not afraid. Xianyuan Feng and Xianyuan Jie had a blood feud, so they had always wanted to settle scores with Qin Hao. As long as they provoked a dispute between Migres Palace Lord and Xiantian Palace, Qin Hao's crimes would be magnified. Even if he had the backing of Migres Palace Lord, violating the rules would not be easy. Even if they did not chase Qin Hao out of the sacred palace, he would still have to be punished. Qin Hao would not be able to withstand the punishment of the sacred palace. He would have to lie in bed for at least a few months. During these few months, his cultivation would definitely fall. This was undisguised revenge. A bunch of mad dogs. Big brother, let's go. Xiaogua grasped the air, the blue Luan exorcism pestle appearing between his palms. He swung it at the hammer-wielding youth from the Xianyuan clan. At the very least, it was better for him to make a move than for Qin Hao. After all, there were nearly 100 disciples in Xiantian Peak, and all of them were geniuses with origin spirit. In addition, several powerful senior brothers were also present. These senior brothers were all great emperors. If Qin Hao made a move, the consequences would be unimaginable. Clang! Without any fancy moves, the pestle collided with the hammer. Violence met violence. A dazzling explosion of sparks immediately followed by a thunderous roar. Qi Xiaogua took 2 steps back from the impact of the 2 powerful forces. She released her soul and the green bull Dharma body roared out. She stomped her feet on the ground and was as steady as Mount Tai. Then, she rushed up and struck again. On the other hand, the hammer-wielding youth did not fare well. His cultivation level was the same as Xiaogua's at 2nd level Emperor Realm. However, the difference in strength between them was not small. His blood and qi roiled, his palms went numb, and he staggered back 5 steps. Now that Xiaogua had awakened the demon ox body, an even more violent aura blossomed. The roar of an ox filled the air, causing the youth's scalp to go numb. Senior brother Qi, you disregarded our friendship and injured me for an outsider. What do you think of the other senior brothers? The hammer-wielding youth roared angrily. In reality, he wasn't injured at all. You talk too much. Syogwa took a step forward, the pestle in his hand. He swung it down from the sky. Gravity! The hammer-wielding youth slammed his palm into the air, causing an invisible pressure to crush the air. Syogwa's descending figure paused for a moment, and the youth took advantage of the opportunity to retreat. Catch? How dare he? Rumble! The two pestles slammed into the ground, causing gravel to fly everywhere. A terrifying crack spread out from the bottom of Qi Xiaogua's feet and blasted towards a furnace opposite her. The furnace exploded, and the flames and ores inside scattered in all directions. Syogwa, you're too ruthless! Xianyuan roared. Then, the four of them slapped their palms at Qi Xiaogua at the same time. The four palms gathered together, and the power of the same origin fused, turning into an extremely frightening gravitational storm. This storm crushed the space and blasted towards Qi Xiaogua. It could be seen with the naked eye that it left a deep dent in the ground, as if it had been crushed by a huge rock. Step back, Brother Melon. Qin Hao activated the indestructible samsara art, and flames surged in his palms. Syogwa would definitely not be able to take this attack. However, an imposing figure descended from the sky at this moment. It was like an iron tower as it directly blocked the storm. There wasn't a trace of soul power undulation, let alone the use of Yuan Qi. This person was directly using his physical body to block the gravitational storm that was blasting towards him. He was treating the four geniuses of the Xianyuan family as a toy. Rumble! There was a deafening explosion. The storm dissipated around Tai Ta's body, but he was unscathed and untouched. Have you had enough? Iron Tower muttered, and an invisible emperor's aura spread out. Although he did not deliberately suppress the crowd, the space seemed to be suffocating. Senior Brother Tian Quebec, Xianyuan and the other four were shocked. They immediately stood in a row and stopped. Senior Brother Tian Ke, Syogwa said, looking at the figure. Tian Ke was the first disciple of Xiantian Peak. He was in the Great Emperor realm, and his cultivation was unfathomable. It was said that even the elders were no match for him. No one below the Xiantian Celestial Lord could defeat him. Qin Hao of Migres Palace greets Senior Brother. Qin Hao cupped his hands slightly. The person in front of him, regardless of cultivation or status, was at the same level as Eastern Sky. He was not someone he could compete with. You are Senior Uncle Migres's new disciple, Eastern Sky and Zhang Yu's junior brother? Tian Ke turned his tower-like body around and looked at Qin Hao with a smile on his face. His upright face exuded an aura of righteousness, as if he was born to give others a sense of reliance. Senior brother, my brother did not do it on purpose. He will leave now. He will leave now. Syogwa was a little panicked and quickly stood between the two. Since you are here, why don't you stay? Tian Ke said. Senior brother is wise. Since you came to the Xiantian Palace, you should be prepared to be punished. So what if you are the palace master's disciple? You taught such a disrespectful disciple. You can see true Lord Migres's character. Fortunately, I did not enter the Migres Palace. Xianyuan and the others' eyes lit up. Tian Ke was not going to let them leave. Are you excited? Tian Ke turned around and looked at Xianyuan and the other four seriously. Since you are so excited, why don't you use your strength on the Purple Rock Mountain? Before sunset, each of you must refine 50 kilograms of purple rock iron. Also, as disciples of the Divine Palace, you spoke rudely to the Palace Lord and disrespected him. Since you have just entered the sect, I will give you a chance. If there is a next time, I will expel you from Xiantian Peak and deduct your Emperor-level Qi building pills for this month. Do you accept? Boom. Xianyuan and the others' minds shook and their faces turned pale. Chapter 1436. Tian Ke, the top disciple of Xiantian Peak, was a great emperor. His cultivation was below Xiantian Peak's, and even the elders couldn't compete with him. Among the 7 peaks of the Divine Palace, Tian Ke's strength was definitely at the top. The mystic heaven deity Lord rarely showed herself, and she was the most mysterious of the 7 peak masters. Not to mention the disciples, even the peak masters rarely saw her in person. All matters of the mystic heaven hall were basically decided by Tian Ke, and he even taught the disciples and taught them the art of forging. To the disciples of the peaks, Tian Ke wasn't just the eldest senior brother in name, but also half a master. Everyone in Xiantian Peak respected him. However, Qin Hao trespassed on Xiantian Peak and violated the rules of the Divine Palace. Tian Ke didn't punish Qin Hao, but punished Xianyuan Di and the others. At this moment, all the new disciples were stunned, and Xiaogua and Gu Kuei were also in disbelief. "Why, eldest senior brother?" Xianyuan Di asked. Even though he was angry, he didn't dare to refute, and only wanted an explanation. The purple rocks of Xiantian Peak were extremely tough, and even emperors would have a hard time mining them, let alone refining them. A purple rock the size of a millstone could only be extracted a few ounces after being refined thousands of times. Tian Ke wanted each of them to refine 50 kilograms before sunset. This was to force them to their death. It was obviously an impossible task. Moreover, the Emperor Realm Qi building pills for the 5 of them were deducted, which was a huge loss. The rules were set by Palace Lord Migres himself. His disciple made a mistake, and eldest senior brother punished us instead. Is he afraid of Migres' perfected lord? From this point of view, aren't the disciples of Xiantian Peak inferior? It's too unfair that the Divine Palace allows Migres' Palace to do whatever they want. If Xiantian Peak is bullied everywhere, what's the point of its dignity and existence in the long run? The Xianyuan family members said seriously. These words came from the bottom of their hearts, but there was no lack of provocation. Tian Ke couldn't help but find it funny. He raised his arm and pointed at the other 6 peaks in the cloud. "Tell me, where does this world belong to?" "Of course, the Divine Palace." Xianyuan Di replied. "Who is in charge of the Divine Palace?" Tian Ke asked again. "True Monarch Migres of Migres Hall." Everyone responded in unison. This was the obvious truth. The entire Divine Palace is managed by Uncle Migres. He is the master of the Divine Palace. Everything is decided by him. As mere disciples, don't you think it's childish to talk about fairness with the palace master? Tian Ke wondered if his new junior brother in front of him had a screw loose in his head. The Divine Palace preaches, and the geniuses of the continent came of their own accord. No one forced you. All the cultivation resources of the sect were provided to you free of charge. The elders who guided you were also willing to sacrifice themselves for you. The financial, material, and manpower of the sect were all used on you, and you still have objections? Tian Ke let out a roar. Disciple knows his mistake. Cold sweat dripped down the faces of Xianyuan Di and the other 4. Only now did they realize that they had misspoken. Not to mention the Divine Palace, what right did the insignificant disciples of the clans or sect masters of the outside world have to question the clan master and the sect master? If they were in the southern proud empire, their actions would be nothing more than haggling with Xianyuan Gaoyan. Considering that your journey has not been easy, that you have just entered the sect, and that you are rational, impulsive, and speak without thinking, I will deduct a month's worth of Emperor Realm Qi building pills. This is considered a light punishment. Tian Ke sneered. Fortunately, his senior brother was not the eastern sky of the Migres Palace. If he had handled things according to the temper of the eastern sky, haha. As the direct disciple of the Migres Palace Master, Qin Hao can listen to any of the peak. His treatment is no different from that of the disciples of the peak masters. This is also the rule of the Divine Palace. If you still question the fairness, then leave the Divine Palace. This place is not suitable for you to cultivate. You can go to the outside world to ask for fairness. Tian-Ke waved his hand and said coldly. His words were extremely heavy. When these words came out, the disciples of the Xiantian Peak were all shocked. Then, it attracted a wave of envy and jealousy. The 7 peaks of the Divine Palace did not preach to each other, but the people of the Migres Palace could freely wander between the 7 peaks without being bound by the rules of the Divine Palace. Moreover, the other peak masters treated Qin Hao as if he was their own direct disciple. They taught him everything they knew and could not hide anything from him. What a superior condition this was! So this is the real treatment of the Palace Lord's disciple. Xiaogua looked at Qin Hao. They were both direct disciples of the peak masters, but why was the difference in status so great that even he was jealous? Senior brother Tian-Ke, I came here today to learn the way of forging, Qin Hao said with a wronged face. If it wasn't for old man Migres, did he really think he would have come willingly? He didn't come to learn forging, but simply to see the Xiantian deity lord. Let's go mining. Xianyuan Di turned around sullenly. Even though he was not convinced, he had to. If he continued to ask for fairness from the Migres Palace, he would be expelled from the sect. He hated the heavens and hated the earth. He hated that true Lord Migres had not taken him as his disciple, but Qin Hao. Wait, make yourself clear before you leave. Qin Hao scolded. Xianyuan Di heard this and turned around subconsciously. Qin Hao was not going to let him go? What do you want to say? The youth holding the forging hammer said coldly. When I killed Xianyuan Feng and Xianyuan Jie in the past, they had only themselves to blame. I just have something to tell you. You should settle your grudges in the outside world. You better behave in the Divine Palace. Qin Hao warned with a sharp gaze. Senior brother Qin Hao is right. Xianyuan Di flicked his sleeves and left with his people. Qin Hao had already told him with his eyes that if he didn't stop now, he would take his life without leaving the Divine Palace. As the disciple of the Divine Palace Master, Qin Hao had a lot of weight. Xianyuan Di knew that he would always be the one at a disadvantage if he fought with him openly. But today, he was indeed miserable. Senior brother Tian-Ke, these people have a grudge against me and must be deliberately trying to stir up trouble. In the future, at Xiantian Peak, I hope senior brother can control them more and persuade them to let go of their grudges and focus on cultivation. Qin Hao cupped his hands at Tian-Ke and sighed silently, as if he had already given up on his grudge. You're right, junior brother. I will counsel them often and let them mine ores to train their minds. Tian-Ke smiled. In the distance, Xianyuan Di and the others felt suffocated. Blood almost surged up from their throats as they helped each other to a mine. Miserable. Gu Kuei shook his head. This should be a warning. Alright, you guys continue to practice forging. How to control the temperature of the fire, how to effectively extract the ores, and how to temper the equipment. I've explained all of these clearly before. Today's mission is to forge a low-grade venerable artifact each. As Tian-Ke's voice rang out, the 100 or so disciples in the training hall got busy again. The clanking sounds of forging continued, and they instantly forgot about Qin Hao's existence. After all, if they didn't meet the standard, their cultivation would be affected by the deduction of Emperor Realm Qi building pills. Junior brother Qin Hao, since we're at Xiantian Peak, you should also join the forging team. Tian-Ke said. Okay. Qin Hao nodded. He rolled up his sleeves and followed Xiaogua to the furnace, followed by Tian-Quebec. By the way, senior brother Tian-Ke, why isn't Uncle Master Xiantian in the training hall? Qin Hao asked. The personal disciples of the Peak Masters naturally had a special relationship. They had to address their elders according to their seniority. The second-class and third-class disciples didn't dare to do so. If ordinary disciples saw Xiantian Immortal Lord, they had to address him as peak masters. If they saw perfected Lord Tianquan, they had to respectfully address him as Palace Lord. It seemed that Qin Hao and Tian Ke were incomparably close. "That's right, senior brother. I didn't see Master either," Xiaogua said. After entering the peak yesterday, Tian Ke was the one who received him. "Master, you're very busy." Tian Ke shook his head helplessly. He hadn't seen Xiantian in person for a long time. He looked at Qin Hao and said, "Junior brother, I'll be teaching you in Xiantian Peak in the future. Do you mind?" "That's exactly what I want." "How would I mind?" Qin Hao smiled. Tian Ke's cultivation was high. He was in the same batch as Eastern Sky, and they were both first seat. They were considered to be on par with each other. It was a good deal for Qin Hao to be taught the art of forging by a 9-star weapon emperor. After all, he was only a lower-level weapon emperor in his previous life. However, Qin Hao didn't mind who taught him. He wanted to meet Xiantian, Immortal Lord, and find out the truth behind Empress Xuantian's death in the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm. However, it seemed that it would be difficult to meet the owner of Xiantian Peak in a short time. Xiaogua came to the furnace and continued to smash the ores. Tian Ke took out a piece of purple metal the size of a stone block from his spatial ring and placed it on the forging table. He said to Qin Hao, "Junior brother, try it." After that, he handed Qin Hao a sword mold. He wanted him to hammer the stone block into a sword. "Okay." Qin Hao grabbed a forging hammer from the rack and raised it above his head. A crescent-shaped shadow of the hammer whizzed through the air and hit the metal block with a bang. "Junior brother, you have amazing wrist strength." Tian Ke couldn't help but be surprised. He knew how heavy Xiantian Peak's forging hammer was. An ordinary disciple could only swing it with 2 hands. However, Qin Hao could easily lift it with 1 hand, and the power he carried when he smashed it down was definitely not something an ordinary primitive emperor could do. Xiaogua, who was recognized by Xiantian Immortal Lord as his personal disciple, would have to use all of his physical strength without using his origin spirit. However, Qin Hao swung it so easily. However, Qin Hao's experience was also very uncomfortable. When the hammer fell, a strong shock wave rushed towards him. He almost lost his grip on the hammer. So hard. Below the forging hammer, there was only a dent on the purple metal. This wasn't what Qin Hao had imagined. According to his estimation, it should have been flattened by the hammer. Although he didn't use his soul power, that strike contained the power of the indestructible samsara art. This ore was not ordinary. Purple rock iron, big brother. This thing was refined from Xiantian Peak's purple rock ore. It is incomparably hard. Moreover, it was personally forged into a metal block by senior brother Tian Quebec. Its density is ridiculously high. You actually made a dent with a casual strike. Xiaogua was shocked. As expected of his lifelong idol. "This is to let Xianyuan Di and the rest mine the purple rock ore." Qin Hao looked at Tian Quebec. He was already mourning for the Xianyuan clan. "Yes." Tian Ke nodded. "The purple rock ore's density can be used to forge an emperor artifact. The ore under your feet is the ore I refined. As for what Xianyuan Di and the rest mined, it is just an ordinary ore." Tian Ke looked at Qin Hao with admiration. This wrist strength was enough to become a king refiner. It would be a pity if he didn't enter Xiantian Peak. No wonder he was chosen by senior uncle Tianquan. Or that can be used to forge an emperor artifact. Qin Hao's eyes were filled with passion. As a great emperor in his previous life, he could naturally measure the power of the purple rock ore. However, to stop him? Impossible. Spitting on his palm, Qin Hao held the forging hammer with both hands. A golden light bloomed and dense scales quickly covered his arms. His body grew by 1 meter. Qin Hao, activate the dragon soul power. Chapter 1437. Qin Hao's body looked like it was brimming with violence. He picked up the hammer and swung it again. Boom! His draconic energy flowed into the hammer, causing it to glow with a golden brilliance that seemed capable of shattering mountains. A powerful force fell from the sky and smashed into the purple stone concentrate, causing the forging table to shake. What domineering strength! Tian-Ke praised. Qin Hao's body was no weaker than a 5th-level Emperor Realm cultivator after being strengthened by his soul power. The purple stone concentrate had caved in even more than before. Tian-Ke could also see that this was far from the limit of Qin Hao's soul power. Clang 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 clang. The sound of hammering continued on the casting table as a series of sparks flashed. Shadows of hammers danced in the air as Qin Hao swung them like a torrential torrent. A whirlwind appeared on the ground, and Qin Hao, who was in the eye of the whirlwind, was like a ferocious beast. He didn't stop to catch his breath. Every strike didn't diminish in strength. On the contrary, his strength continued to increase. His violent and tireless attitude caused Tian-Ke's heart to tremble as he watched from the side. Xiantian Peak had never had a disciple like Qin Hao. This wasn't forging, it was fighting and killing. In comparison, the other disciples of the training hall were like a group of young ladies who had just come out of their boudoir. Their movements were as gentle as sheep. However, Tian-Ke only admired Qin Hao's talent. He didn't approve of such fanatical methods, even though Qin Hao looked very passionate. Thump! The final hammer was hammered down. Qin Hao stopped and looked at the large purple sword lying on the forging table with a satisfied smile. The sword was thick and rough. It didn't have a sharp edge, and traces of purple stone could be seen on the blade. It looked like countless patches were stacked together, making for an ugly appearance. Even so, a low-rank emperor weapon might not be as sturdy as it. What do you think? Qin Hao looked at Tian-Ke confidently. Although the craftsmanship was a little rough, it was still a sword mold after all. As long as it went through the later stages of reforging, refining, and sharpening, the sword would undergo a tremendous change. When the time came, the sword would be unsheathed and its sharpness would reach 10,000 meters. Big brother, you're too amazing! Xiaogua clasped his hands in worship. The reverence in his heart began to overflow like a surging river. Tian-Ke only smiled and did not answer. Next, he took out a purple rock metal block that was about the same size as the one that Qin Hao had forged. Then, he aimed his palm at the tool rack and a casting hammer fell into his palm. At this instant, the expression of the first seat of the Xiantian Peak turned extremely solemn. Tian-Ke quietly stared at the violet ore on the platform. His gaze seemed to be immersed in the ore. He held the hammer in his hand, and although there wasn't a trace of energy circulating around him, in the eyes of Qin Hao, Tian-Ke's figure was incomparably majestic, as though he was a god that had descended to the mortal world, possessing the power to split open the heavens and cast the earth. He was so tall that it was difficult to look at him. Drink! Tian-Ke moved. He lowered his waist and dismounted from his horse. His 2 feet stepped on the ground and his body seemed to be connected to the earth. Earth chi turned into blood and surged. He still didn't use any vital chi or soul power. He raised his arm and the hammer shadow fell. It was an ordinary and simple movement. Bang! A muffled sound rang out. It wasn't loud, but the violet ore that Qin Hao had hammered thousands of times was flattened by Tian-Ke's hammer. It lay flat on the platform like a flat cake. So strong. The shadow of a hammer flashed in front of Qin Hao's eyes. It was as if his soul had been shattered along with it. Without using vital chi or soul power, Tian-Ke simply waved his hand and surpassed Qin Hao, who was one of the strongest emperors in the Emperor realm. This was the terror of a great emperor. Settle the mind, enter the tool, and use the soul as the hammer to break all things. With that thought in mind, Tian-Ke smashed down again. An incomparably strong power spread out, and on the forging table, the destructive power formed a ripple that swept out, transforming into a swirling current of air. The purple rock essence that was spread out was pulled towards the center, tightly gathering together. This was the second hammer strike. Forging weapons is based on strength, but the creation of weapons is not the product of strength. Only where the heart desires will the weapon have a soul. Only then can it be worthy of being a cultivator's divine soldier. Bang! The third hammer strike. This strike slashed out like a knife. The hammer in Tian Kei's hand rubbed against the violet rock sword, causing a layer of lightning to appear between the two and emit a sharp sound. The way of the physical body, the third level of the great emperor realm. Qin Hao was shocked. Tian Kei's cultivation level was comparable to his in his previous life. However, he was only the chief disciple under one peak. The divine palace's foundation was terrifying. At this time, after the lightning flashed, a second violet sword appeared on the platform. Its length, width, and thickness were exactly the same as the one that Qin Hao had forged. This meant that without any further tempering and polishing, the density at which the two swords were hammered by external forces was the same. However, the former had been hammered by Qin Hao 1,000 times. The latter had only been hammered 3 times. Junior brother Qi, catch. Tian Kei waved his hand and the violet sword he'd forged on the platform fell into Xiaogua's hand. Tian Kei smiled at Qin Hao and said, "Junior brother Qin, pick up your sword." "Okay." Qin Hao nodded. He threw away the hammer and bent down to pick up the other violet sword. He got into a fighting stance and looked at Xiaogua. "Junior brother, come." They were both sword molds. They hadn't been polished, sharpened, or refined. Although Tian Kei was a king refiner, the hammering force he used to forge the sword was equal to Qin Hao's. The density of the two swords was the same. Tian Kei let him touch it. Qin Hao wasn't afraid. "I'm coming." Xiaogua picked up the sword with both hands and dragged it on the ground. With a swish, sparks flew. When he got close, he raised the sword and slashed down. Qin Hao responded with the same attack. At this moment, neither of them activated their Yuan Qi or soul power. After all, the strength of one's Yuan Qi would affect the quality of the weapon to a certain extent. Clang! The two heavy swords crossed each other. To his surprise, Qin Hao's sword was broken by Xiaogua. With a clang, the other part of the sword fell to the bottom of his feet. However, Xiaogua's sword didn't even have a dent. Although it was blunt, it was extremely sharp. How can this be? Qin Hao was stunned. The two swords were hammered at different times, but the force they endured was the same. Why was it that his masterpiece, which had been hammered thousands of times, could not withstand a single blow, and was broken by the work of the 3 hammers of Tian Kei? "You don't understand?" Tian Kei turned around and smiled. "Junior brother Qin, before you entered the Divine Palace, did you have a sword with you?" "Yes," Qin Hao replied. At this moment, he became more serious. "Take it out and try," Tian Kei said. Qin Hao nodded and grasped the void. The emerald light shone under his palm. The outer flame of the emerald light shone with a layer of blood. It was the great void sword. Good sword. Tian Kei could tell at a glance whether it was a masterpiece or not. He pointed at Xiaogua and said, "Junior brother Qi, do it." "Big brother, be careful." Xiaogua shouted and waved the edgeless heavy sword again. The same move was blunt, but it turned into sharp sword light in midair. Qin Hao's eyes turned cold. With the great void sword in his hand, his aura changed obviously. It wasn't intentional, but every time he held the great void sword, it meant that a fierce battle was about to break out. Then, a ray of emerald light slashed down from his hand. Crack! The emerald light spread over the edgeless heavy sword. The purple heavy sword was cut in half. The cut was very smooth. It could be seen how sharp the great void sword was. "You scared me to death." Xiaogua held the broken sword and took 2 steps back. He knew that Qin Hao wouldn't hurt him, but Qin Hao's cold aura was still very scary. Your sword can be called a superb item. It should have the ability to evolve. But it's still at the peak of the venerable weapon. It hasn't evolved into an imperial weapon. Tian Kei's eyes were sharp. He smiled and pointed at the broken sword in Xiaogua's hand. But your venerable weapon can break an imperial weapon sword model. Do you understand now? Soul. Qin Hao waved his hand and put the great void sword into his spatial ring. He did understand. The purple rock sword he made before was broken because it didn't have a soul. Tian Kei had only used 3 hammers, but these 3 hammers were infused with his will and soul. It was the same for the great void sword. When Qin Hao refined the second form of the great void tripod, it took him 3 days and 3 nights. He was exhausted and almost fainted. His will was integrated into the sword. He used the red lotus fire to sharpen it and used his heart. Thank you for your guidance, Senior Brother Tian Quebec. Qin Hao bowed sincerely. Although he wasn't here to forge weapons, Senior Brother Tian Kei made him understand that forging weapons also had a soul. No matter what kind of weapon was forged, one had to use his heart. This was the same principle as alchemy. In his previous life, Qin Hao was able to reach the level of Dendi because his alchemy had a heart and a soul. There are 3,000 great paths, and each path has its limit. Why are there so few people who can reach the limit? Sword Emperor, Refiner Emperor, Dendi Emperor Realm. It's not as simple as one realm. Let's forge another sword. Forge a sword with a soul. If not, I won't let you leave Xiantian Peak today. Tian Kei smiled and walked away. As he walked, he muttered, "Focus, enter the weapon. The soul is the hammer that can break all things. Power is the foundation. Where the heart is, the soldier is invincible." Qin Hao listened carefully and bowed deeply to Tian Kei's back. Today, he had indeed learned something. Big brother, what does Senior Brother Tian Kei mean? Can you only create a divine soldier with your heart? Xiaogua scratched his head and asked. Forge an emperor weapon with a soul. When you forge it, I'll tell you the real answer. Qin Hao rubbed his throat and lowered his voice. He imitated Tian Kei's tone. TCH. Xiaogua waved his sleeve and continued forging. He only needed to forge a venerable weapon. First, he needed to protect the Emperor Realm Qi-laying pill. Qin Hao chuckled and watched Tian Kei's figure disappear into the profound heaven palace. Was the first seat of Xiantian Peak really just teaching him how to forge weapons? Not really. What was hidden in Tian Kei's words was the Emperor's path. As the sun set, Qin Hao was stuck in the high temperature of the mysterious heaven peak. Even though he had a fire spirit, Qin Hao was still drenched in sweat. Fortunately, he managed to complete a work that satisfied Tian Kei and was released from the mysterious heaven peak. Although I didn't see the Lord of Xiantian Peak in person, I learned some things. After returning to Migres Peak, Qin Hao fetched water and took a bath in the pavilion, then he slightly adjusted his breathing and meditated to eliminate the fatigue of the day. He didn't care about the people the Xianyuan family left in the Divine Palace. He didn't even pay attention to them. However, Tian Kei, who he saw today, attracted Qin Hao's attention. The Lord of Xiantian Peak was busy forging weapons. It was said that she hadn't shown her face for 100 years. All matters were decided by the head disciple, Tian Quebec. Even the teaching of weapon forging was handled by Tian Quebec vaguely. Was this a hint? I hope it's not what I imagined. Qin Hao lay on the bed. He remembered clearly that on the first day he entered the Divine Palace, the voice that came from Xiantian Peak was female. It wasn't Tian Kei's thick voice. At the very least, it proved that the Lord of Xiantian Peak was still alive. Of course, he didn't reject being imprisoned and being forced to shout those words. Chapter 1438. Qianshan Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation Translator. Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. The path to Emperor. The cause of Empress Xuantian's death in the Hidden Dragon Mystery Realm was still unknown. In the Divine Palace, the current Xiantian Peak Lord was showing signs of disappearing. What secrets did the Xiantian Peak Lord have? During the period when the new disciples are learning, the Peak Lord will personally come to the training hall to teach. The Xiantian Deity Lord is no exception. She has to appear at least once. Qin Hao thought for a while. There were still 6 days. In these 6 days, as long as he saw the Xiantian Peak Lord in person, everything would be much clearer. After learning forging techniques for a day, Qin Hao took a bath and felt comfortable all over. Soon, he fell asleep. The next day, wearing the Mantis Hall uniform, Qin Hao left the Migres Hall and thought about which peak to go to. Because he had left a voice transmission jade slip with Xiaogua, if the Xiantian Peak Lord came out of seclusion, he would definitely be notified. Therefore, he was not worried about delaying things. Dong, dong, dong. The sky suddenly lit up, and the Divine Palace bell rang in the clouds. The morning sun rose slowly with the sound of the bell. The 7 peaks of the Divine Palace became lively again. On Taiwei Peak, the fragrance of herbs filled the air. On Uni Peak, there was a formation light floating. On Yaoguang Peak, there was the sound of instruments and instrument. On Daozong Peak, there was a hubbub of voices. On Xiantian Peak, there was the sound of iron being forged again. On Mizang Hall, there was a deafening battle cry. The atmosphere of the 7 peaks was different. Although they were very far away, the different styles of cultivation atmosphere were clearly transmitted to Qin Hao's spiritual awareness. On the other hand, Migres Peak seemed especially cold. As the main peak of the Divine Palace, Migres Hall has no cultivation atmosphere at all. Qin Hao said. Then, he looked in the direction of Daozong Peak. It was the liveliest there, and the sound of people was overwhelming. That was it. Daozong Peak had the most disciples. Xiao Han, Keir Wuk, Zhou Wudao, and Qin Hao knew more than half of them. They were all from Daozong Peak and were Lord Daozong Peak. As the saying goes, a day after a day without seeing you, I'll make a trip to Daozong Peak. I'll let Han's word. Qin Hao said with a smile. He glanced at the hall robes on his body and saw the word, authority, embroidered on his chest. He raised his head and puffed out his chest, leaping into the air. The Migres Hall's unique flying praying mat flickered beneath his feet. However, at this moment, a huge gust of air suddenly rushed towards him from behind. It was extremely sudden, and Qin Hao felt as if a hurricane had brushed past his shoulder. The gust of wind blew against his face, and his hair fluttered wildly. His body flew out uncontrollably. This is translation, translation, that is translation. Translation, this is translation. Not only did she not greet him, she even charged at him twice in a row. No matter what, you've successfully attracted my attention. Qin Hao stared at Daozong Peak. He could not take this lying down. Don't think I won't touch you just because you're my peak. However, it seems like I can't beat you. You're up early. I heard you went to Xiantian Dojo yesterday, and showed off in front of Tian Quebec. You also used your identity as a Migres Hall disciple to be arrogant again. Did you enjoy it? Lord Migres's bell-like laughter was heard as he stepped out of Migres Hall. It's so. It's not really enjoyable. But speaking of arrogance, someone was even more arrogant than me, Qin Hao said angrily. Who? Why didn't I see it? Lord Migres was stunned. Someone was arrogant at Migres Peak. You didn't see it? Qin Hao was angry. He pointed at Daozong Peak. Fly over there. You're lying with your eyes wide open. What's wrong with you? There's only you and me here. Where did a third person come from? Did you become muddle-headed from studying forging? Elder Migres said with a sullen face. He did not even call him master. Good, you're good. Qin Hao turned around and flew away on his praying mat. It was obvious that he was bullying them together. "Old Third, you still haven't paid your respects to your master. Didn't you say you'd praise me once in the morning and once in the afternoon, and we'd even have supper tonight?" Elder Migres was so angry that he stomped his feet. The new disciple had shown his true colors on the second day of entering the sect. How shameless! Forget it. Who asked him to be so talented? He could not bear to teach him a lesson. They flew all the way to Daozong Peak. This peak senior had indeed provoked Qin Hao. Eastern Sky and Chong Yu had teamed up to hide it from him. The old man at home had also joined in the act. They thought it was fun, but Qin Hao did not think it was fun at all. Fine. He chased her to Daozong Peak and made her apologize. Daozong Temple. Below the magnificent ancient temple, Lord Daozong had personally set up a platform and opened a training hall to explain the way of cultivation to the disciples. Such an opportunity was very rare. Once a disciple entered the divine palace, they would only have a few chances in their life. Naturally, they would cherish it. At this moment, many disciples came. Regardless of whether it was the older disciples or the new disciples, there was a sea of people in the training hall. As far as the eye could see, there were close to 1,000 people. It was a beautiful scene. After all, Daozong Peak was the place with the most disciples of the divine palace. The number of disciples in Daozong Peak was enough to account for half of the total number of disciples in the divine palace. At this time, in the front row of the vast training hall, there were many extraordinary figures sitting on praying mats. The most eye-catching ones were the female disciples such as Xiao Han, Kair and Fairy Qian Ning. Many male disciples looked at them with a faint admiration. Next, Shou Wuk, Zhou Wudao, Feng Qianli, and the others were also very outstanding. After all, they were the personal disciples of Lord Daozong among this batch of new disciples. Qin Hao drove the praying mat to the foot of the mountain gate and walked step by step into the training hall. His footsteps were light and slow. He did not dare to disturb old man Daozong and ruin the atmosphere of the lecture. He chose a corner and sat down. Through the layers of figures, he accurately found Xiao Han at the front. Xiao Han was in the first row and sat in the center of the core of the personal disciples. It was enough to show that Lord Daozong valued her very much. Qin Hao nodded with satisfaction. Old man Daozong treated Han well. Of course, this also proved the girl's talent. After all, the divine palace was not a place that only looked at appearance. Everyone here was very outstanding and not so superficial. In the outside world, appearance might be able to charm people. But in the divine palace, potential, talent, and strength were the foundation of admiration. In cultivation, most people focus on high-level cultivation techniques, combat skills, and whether or not they have a peerless divine soldier. They often neglect the most basic cultivation of martial art. At this time, Lord Daozong sat on the platform majestically. On either side of him stood 6 elders with extremely restrained auras. Below the elders, several dignified disciples stood with their hands behind their backs. Without exception, these disciples who stood with the elders had all reached the great emperor realm. They were the personal disciples of the previous peak master. Now, they stood here for 2 reasons. One was to listen to the lecture, and the other was to intimidate or rather, to show off. Perfected Lord Daozong was a person who placed a lot of importance on ceremony. The more great emperors around him, the more powerful he would be. After all, they were all experts he had taught, and he wanted to motivate the new disciples below him. Qin Hao listened quietly. Old man Daozong's voice was full of a kind of magic. Coupled with his dignified but not angry old-fashioned appearance, it seemed that no matter what he said, it was always right. He continued, "The disciples of Daozong Peak are the most outstanding talents in the 4 regions of the continent. Many of them are proud and think that their talent is unparalleled. They think that only high-level cultivation techniques and a peerless divine soldier are worthy of their status. Haha, I'm sure that some people have begun to complain in private. They think that I'm talking nonsense, and that it's more important to teach you a few sets of emperor technique. But have you ever thought about a question? Why is there a difference in strength between martial artists in the same realm? This situation does not only happen to ordinary martial artists, but also to soul essence geniuses like you. Why is there a difference in strength between people in the same realm and even learning the same kind of cultivation technique? Even when a fight breaks out, one side will be crushed. For example, those who pass the assessment of the 5 rings will be stronger than those who were eliminated. But those who were eliminated will be able to crush those in the same realm when they return to the outside world. Is it really just a matter of the strength of the cultivation technique? Replying to Master, different talents and different foundations will naturally result in differences in the process of postnatal cultivation. A voice rang out. It was Head Wu Quebec. True Lord Daozong nodded and stroked his beard. That's right, but you didn't get to the point. I made it clear that even among ordinary martial artists, there will be differences in strength between those in the same realm. This has nothing to do with talent. Showuk paused and began to think. Cultivation starts from the moment you step onto the martial path. Many of you were born in martial arts families and started cultivating at a young age. At that time, your elders paid more attention to the speed of cultivation and would often compare children of the same age. Children with higher realms were regarded as geniuses, while those with lower realms were not suitable for cultivation and were considered trash. Pedantic, simply too pedantic. True Lord Daozong snorted. At this moment, many of the disciples felt the same way. After all, it had happened to them before. The strength of cultivation does not depend on the speed of growth. Everyone has different physiques and can withstand different amounts of spirit qi. Some people have shallow sea of spirit qi and only need 3 days of spirit qi to break through to the next realm. Some people have deep sea of spirit qi and often need more spirit qi. However, if you fight again on the day of the breakthrough, you will find that the person who won earlier will become the loser in the end. This is cultivation. Master, what you mean is to constantly temper oneself, Zhou Wudao said. Yes. True Lord Daozong nodded and glanced in Zhou Wudao's direction with a satisfied expression. No matter the realm, the strength of the physical body, the strength of spirit qi, and even the meridians and bones of the body, they are the key. They determine how destructive the power of your attacks will be and how destructive the techniques you use will be. They are the source, the so-called foundation of martial arts. In martial arts cultivation, from the body tempering realm to the yuan gathering realm is a watershed. After the yuan gathering realm, one can absorb the spirit qi of heaven and earth and use the sea of spirit qi to transform it into substantial spirit qi. Thus, there will be 2 major cultivation directions. One is to continue tempering the physical body, and the other is to temper the spirit qi. However, the strength of the spirit qi you use is still inseparable from the tolerance of the meridians. It is the same for the saint realm. As everyone knows, when a martial artist enters the saint realm, it is a great leap in life. At that time, it is not the realm that leaps, but your physical body and meridians. When you enter the saint realm, the power of your spirit qi is terrifying. A saint can destroy mountains with a wave of his hand. Qin Hao nodded. The yuan gathering realm and the saint realm were indeed the 2 watersheds of martial arts. After that was the emperor realm. Presumably, true Lord Daozong would begin to explain the basics of the emperor realm. Entering the emperor realm was the goal of all the disciples present. Chapter 1439. On the path of cultivation, no matter what level you reach, be it cultivation methods, martial arts techniques, or divine soldier weapons, they are all ways to strengthen your attacks. Only by constantly tempering yourself can you achieve the great path. And it's not a bad thing to grow quickly. No matter how weak a person is, as long as his level is high enough, he will have an absolute advantage. After Lord Daozong finished speaking, he stretched out his palm. In an instant, the spiritual chi of heaven and earth surged madly towards the void. The void rumbled, and the whistling palm chi was like a towering mountain that broke through the clouds. The sky seemed to have collapsed, and the thousands of disciples in the training hall were all in awe. There's no palm technique in it. It's just the most ordinary palm chi. Qin Hao murmured. Palm chi could be used by any martial artist, but because Lord Daozong was a great emperor, his ordinary palm chi could be said to be destructive. This was the advantage brought by the level. Ordinary moves could not be countered. You can all see that my palm chi is very ordinary, but if I use an emperor-level palm chi, its power will be even stronger. But it can only scare you. If a great emperor were to fight against me, this palm chi would not be able to hurt him at all. Lord Daozong looked at everyone with a smile. So, if you want to win against someone of the same level, you have to constantly temper yourself and let your foundation be deeper than your opponent. Even if you enter the Great Emperor realm, this rule is still valid. Everyone was shocked. It was finally the Great Emperor realm. The Great Emperor realm mobilizes the power of heaven and earth and transforms rules to suppress all life. The rules are a part of your body. They exist in your spirit, your will, and even your flesh. When great emperors fight, whoever has the stronger rules will be stronger. Lord Daozong spoke very seriously. This was the key to his teaching today. The Great Emperor realm used the will of the emperor to mobilize the power of heaven and earth, transmuting the rules and giving birth to the Great Path. Master is telling us that the method to temper the will of the Great Emperor needs to start from the martial artist's spirit, will, and even blood. Showuk asked. He was born with the power of rules and could be said to be the pride of the heavens. At first, he did not know what was special about this ability. Even now, he was still confused about the understanding of rules. Wuk's words are correct. I heard that you were born with a sword Dao law called piercing. It can ignore a martial artist's defense. If you want to strengthen your law of penetration and make it stronger, you have to start with your willpower and spirit. However, everyone's understanding of martial arts cultivation is different. Even if they have the same power of rules, it will be divided according to one's comprehension. It will depend on who has a more thorough comprehension. After the Taoist scripture was finished, everyone committed it to memory. At the same time, many disciples cast envious glances at Showuk. Up until today, they finally understood why Showuk was strong, and it was actually because he was born with the laws of the sword Tao. This made many senior disciples feel envious. After all, the rules were not so easy to comprehend. Showuk was very lucky. Alright, today's lesson will end here. I believe that after listening to it, you will have a deeper understanding of martial arts cultivation. Next, let's use this as a topic to discuss whether talent or hard work is more important in cultivation. Let's all express our opinions. Taoist scripture waved his hand and left the time for the disciples. The next moment, the training hall immediately fell into a discussion, but most of them whispered and did not dare to stand up and speak. Sister, which one do you think is more important? Kair asked Xiaohan. Talent. Xiaohan replied. Not necessarily. Many seniors in the Water Jade Holy Empire were not outstanding when they were young. They relied on hard work to improve and eventually surpassed their peers and achieved great achievements. Fairy Qian Ning disagreed. Which one do you think is more important? Showuk looked at Zhou Wudao beside him. Only children would choose. Of course, both are important. Zhou Wudao replied. Wuk, tell us which one is more important. On the podium, perfected Lord Taoist scripture spoke. Master, talent and hard work are equally important. Showuk stood up and replied. Does anyone have a different opinion? Taoist scripture looked at all the disciples in the training hall. Master, both are equally important. Nearly 1,000 disciples bowed their heads and expressed the same opinion as Showuk. Only a fool would choose a trick to trick children. No, I think that a martial artist's talent is more important. At this moment, a voice sounded from the corner of the training hall. Although the voice was not loud, it was unique among the orderly responses. Immediately, all the disciples turned their heads and saw a young man wearing a green robe with the word Quan printed on his chest. His white hair fluttered in front of his forehead as he sat down with a smile. Qin Hao. Duwuk smiled. He had actually come. Moreover, he hadn't even said a word of greeting. This guy. Zhou Wudao glared at Qin Hao fiercely. He wanted to go against him again. He was really his nemesis. Brother Qin Hao. Xiao Han raised his hand slightly and waved. Qin Hao nodded and smiled. Migre's palace disciple, you are Qin Hao. I heard that your talent in the 5th arena test was extremely strong. Tell me, why do you think that a martial artist's talent is more important? Dao Zong did not have the slightest intention of avoiding the topic. A touch of kindness appeared on his old-fashioned and dignified face as he asked. Ahem, martial Uncle Daozong, talent is of course the most important. For example, between an essence soul martial artist and an ordinary martial artist, the former has a far greater advantage than the latter in terms of learning ability and cultivation speed. As time passes, the gap between the two will grow larger and larger until it is out of reach. Moreover, essence soul martial artists themselves have a certain special ability. You said before that when a martial artist enters the Emperor's path, they use the Emperor's intent to mobilize the power of heaven and earth and derive the power of the rules to suppress their life. The strength of the rules depends on the martial artist's willpower, spirit, and even martial comprehension. Let me ask you, between an essence soul martial artist with a strange flame and an ordinary martial artist without a essence soul, who has a stronger comprehension of flames? Or, between a genius with a sword soul and an ordinary sword master, who can summon stronger sword chi? Qin Hao's gaze swept across the training hall. At this moment, Dao Zong and the thousands of people seemed to be struggling. This logic seemed to be correct. In his previous life, Qin Hao had cultivated to the level of Dendi by relying on exquisite skills and tireless struggle and hard work. However, at that time, he did not have an essence soul. It took him a few hundred years to reach this level. In this life, Qin Hao had the power of 3 soul spirit. In less than 10 years, he had entered the Emperor realm. He knew better than anyone else how important an essence soul was. Of course, entering the Emperor realm was not purely due to the essence soul. It was also inseparable from his previous life's experience in alchemy. However, this was enough to prove the importance of an essence soul. According to what you said, people without talent do not need to work hard? Their fate is already decided? What do you think of all the martial artists in the world who work hard to cultivate? Feng Qianli stood up and said, no matter how important talent was, a person's hard work could not be slandered and trampled on. Today, true Lord Daozong had opened the lecture hall to say that no matter what realm one reached, hammering oneself was the foundation of the great path. In other words, it was tantamount to telling everyone to work hard to cultivate. However, Qin Hao's suggestion was the opposite of Daozong's. Who did he think he was? What right did he have to refute true Lord Daozong? When did you hear me say that martial artists do not need to work hard? A martial artist's talent and hard work do not conflict. Let's talk about talent first, then hard work. If you don't even have talent and only have a burning heart, how can you compare to someone who is more talented and hardworking than you? You and I are proof of this. Qin Hao glanced at Feng Qianli and jumped out to take the lead. You! Feng Qianli was suddenly at a loss for words. He was so anxious that he secretly clenched his fist. Of course, I don't mean to slander hard work. Under the premise of hard work, a strong talent will appear to be superior. Qin Hao cupped his hands and saluted true Lord Daozong. He had come to listen to the lecture, not to tear down Daozong's platform. You have an opinion. How about this? Can a disciple of Daozong Peak come out and compare notes with Qin Hao? Let's see how strong a martial artist's talent can be. Daozong said, Feng Qianli, as my personal disciple and a disciple of the Sword Emperor of the East Continent, your talent in swordsmanship is naturally extraordinary. Why don't you compare notes with Qin Hao? This. Feng Qianli glanced in Qin Hao's direction and felt a chill in his heart. In his mind, he could not help but think of the terrible scene of the war drums being destroyed, the golden bell flying, and the 10 statues fusing into one. He coughed heavily twice. Along with the coughing, his spirit seemed to be weakened. His voice also became weaker. I just entered the Divine Palace. Daozong Peak is too high and too humid. Unfortunately, I caught a cold. Cough, cough, my condition is not good. I'm afraid I'll disgrace you, Master. All the disciples were stunned. A cold? Daozong's face darkened slightly. He turned to look at Shou Wuck and said, Wuck, you're here. You didn't catch a cold, did you? Disciple is untalented. I cannot exchange blows with Qin Hao. Disciple's sword is a sword used to kill. Unless Master wishes to see one of us fall, said Qin Hao. Shou Wuck said seriously. He was not afraid. He was just stating the facts. This seemed like a small competition, but in fact, it concerned the reputation of Migres Palace and Daozong Palace. Old man Daozong was an extremely prideful person. Shou Wuck naturally had to do his best in this battle. If he did so, someone would definitely fall between him and Qin Hao. You're so serious. Zhou Wudao, it's your turn. Old man Daozong did not want anything to happen to Shou Wuck. He still valued disciples who were born with the rules of swordsmanship. Cough, cough, cough. I caught a cold. Zhou Wudao suddenly fell to the ground and coughed violently. Shou Wuck glanced at him coldly. Come on, even if you're pretending, you should at least pretend. But then again, no one in this batch of new disciples would be willing to be Qin Hao's opponent. This is strange. Perfected Lord Daozong glared angrily. Who would catch a cold? Is the humidity on Daozong Peak really that high? Or did they get scared by Qin Hao? Then, he looked at Xiaohan. Xiaohan's talent was the most outstanding among this batch of new disciples. She could be called the hope of this generation of Daozong Peak. However, when he saw the love flowing in Xiaohan's eyes, he immediately dismissed the idea of letting her fight. Master, I'm willing to see junior brother Qin Hao's talent in Migres Palace. At this moment, a voice sounded from below. Everyone looked in the direction of the voice. They saw a young man standing in the 10th row of the vast training hall. He had a very straight figure and a bearing like a divine spear. It's the senior brother from the previous batch. Shou Wuck could not help but become serious. He saw that the disciple was surrounded by surging golden flames. It was obvious that he was an upper-level emperor. Qin Hao could naturally deal with an ordinary high-level origin emperor. However, none of the disciples of Daozong Peak were ordinary. Qin Hao has met a tough opponent this time. Zhou Wudao peeked from the ground. Even he was not a match for this senior brother from Daozong Peak. Chapter 1440. In the training hall, Lord Daozong had finished teaching. Next, there would be a spar to verify the impact of talent between warriors. The training hall was silent. No one in the new batch of disciples was willing to step out. Qin Hao's performance in the Fallen Emperor Bei test was obvious to all, and there were only a few people who could match him. Among those few people, Shou Wuck, who was born with the rules of the sword, was not confident that he could win. As for the others, how could they overestimate themselves and step out? For a time, Qin Hao of Migres Palace alone suppressed all the disciples of Daozong Peak. The glory of the direct disciple of the palace lord was very eye-catching. But for Lord Daozong it was a little embarrassing. Approved, Daozong said. It was ungentlemanly to let the older disciples fight Qin Hao, who had just entered the divine palace 2 days ago. But Daozong had no choice. But this spar would definitely be a fair fight. Daozong Peak would not take advantage of Qin Hao because of their realm advantage. All the disciples in the training hall dispersed, revealing a vast space in the center. The only disciple left stood facing Qin Hao. This spar, when the older disciple spoke, instantly captured everyone's hearts. Among the new batch of disciples, Qin Hao was undoubtedly the strongest. What could his so-called talent do against the older disciple? Everyone was looking forward to it. However, some people who had a good relationship with Qin Hao were a little worried. But even if they failed, the older disciple of Daozong Peak would not hurt Qin Hao. Daozong Palace, Yu Hui, the young man said. Migres Palace, Qin Hao. Qin Hao said. Their gazes met, and a formless pressure could be felt between them. Both of them had serious expressions on their faces. Although Qin Hao was a new disciple who had just entered the divine palace, he was the disciple of the Migres Palace Lord. The younger brother of the Palace Lord was so talented that Yu Hui did not dare to underestimate him. Eastern Sky, who had entered the Migres Palace last time, had now reached the Great Emperor Realm. Yu Hui, who was in the same batch, had not reached the Great Emperor Realm. Qin Hao, who was standing in front of him, was Eastern Sky's junior brother. His talent was on the same level as Eastern Sky's. Yu Hui didn't dare to underestimate Qin Hao. Qin Hao was the same. Yu Hui was reserved and calm, but his body contained an unparalleled sharpness. He was definitely a rare opponent. This could be seen from where he sat in the training hall. The 10th row, with nearly 1,000 people, was very close to the front. Yu Hui was clearly a second-class disciple from the previous batch. Furthermore, he was one of the best among the second-class disciples. He was roughly on par with Qin Yun and Aku, but slightly weaker than the first-class geniuses. Junior brother Qin Hao, I'm at the peak of the 9th level Emperor Realm, and you're at the 2nd level. This battle isn't fair to you, so I'll suppress my cultivation to the same level as yours. When the time comes, we'll use everything we have, whether it's origin energy or origin soul. Yu Hui said seriously. This was not contempt, but respect. Senior brother Yu Hui and Xing Xing were once so close, but they just brushed past each other. Zhou Wudao smiled evilly. This Yu Hui had dug a hole for himself. In that case, there's no more suspense. Shou Wuk had been quite spirited, but now he simply closed his eyes. Xiao Han breathed a sigh of relief. Senior brother Yu's integrity was worthy of respect. He only hoped that he wouldn't regret it later. The subtle changes below naturally did not escape the attention of the elders and the top disciples of Daozong Peak, who were standing on both sides of the podium. At the head of the top disciples, a young man with an extraordinary temperament smiled at Daozong and said, Master, it seems that Qin Hao is very important in the hearts of this batch of juniors. This young man's name was Xinghua. His status was on par with Eastern Sky and Tian Quebet. He was also the chief disciple of a peak and the strongest eldest disciple of Daozong Peak. He could infer from Shou Wuk, Zhou Wudao, and Xiao Han's expressions that even Yu Hui might not be able to defeat Qin Hao. Someone chosen by Senior Uncle Migres is bound to be monstrously talented. However, no matter how outstanding he is, he hasn't been baptized by the Divine Palace. How can he be a match for junior brother Yu Hui? Senior brother, you overestimate him. On the opposite side of Xinghua, a disciple standing at the head of the table spoke with an equally imposing manner. He was the second disciple of Lord Daozong. His name was Shurmu. His cultivation was in the Great Emperor Realm. He was slightly weaker than Xinghua, but not by much. You think Yu Hui will win? Shenghua smiled. Definitely. Shermu's sharp eyes looked at the platform. When they fell on Qin Hao and Yu Hui, he seemed to have already seen the outcome. Nothing is absolute in this world. Junior brother, don't jump to conclusions too early. Shenghua smiled. Shut your mouths and just watch, Daozong said in a low voice. At this moment, he was a little uncertain. Generally speaking, no matter how outstanding a new disciple was, it was impossible for him to defeat a senior disciple who had cultivated for hundreds of years in the Divine Palace. Moreover, Yu Hui's ability was not bad in the entire Daozong Peak. But why did Qin Hao have an indescribable feeling that made Daozong's heart palpitate? Outside the platform, Qin Hao raised his hand and saluted. Senior brother, I appreciate your kindness, but you don't have to suppress your cultivation to the same level as mine. Just make your move, junior brother, Yu Hui said. His clothes swelled up and a fierce golden brilliance swept out from under his clothes. The brilliance continued to weaken until finally his aura stabilized at the second level of the Emperor realm. He was a man of his word. All right. Senior brother, you be careful, Qin Hao said. He stomped his foot on the ground and shot forward. He didn't use the art of endless samsara, nor did he use his qi or soul. The simplest of punches pierced through the air with a sonic boom. This punch was extremely powerful. Stop! Yu Hui spread his feet apart and waited for the right moment. Like a boulder rooted to the ground, he stood firm and reached out with one hand to grab Qin Hao. However, when the fist and palm collided, a ferocious force penetrated his palm and shook his entire body. Yu Hui felt like there was a ferocious beast in front of him that wanted to overturn him. He was forced to retreat. What a strong physical strength! Shermu was slightly surprised. It was obvious that he had underestimated Qin Hao. Junior brother Qin Hao defeated Yu Hui with a single punch in the same realm. I'm afraid his foundation is not inferior to the madmen of Mizang Hall and Tianxian Hall, Shenghua said. True Lord Daozong had just said that the difference between cultivators of the same realm was a matter of foundation. Yu Hui's physical strength was obviously not as strong as Qin Hao's. It's just physical strength. A cultivator's strength is not measured by physical strength alone. Besides, brute force is not junior brother Yu's forte. His strength is his qi, Shermu said. Although Qin Hao was slightly weaker, it didn't mean that he could defeat Yu Hui. Shermu, Qin Hao has not trained in the Divine Palace. He has only been here for 2 days and only learned some forging skills from Tian Ke in Tianxian Hall. Yu Hui entered Daozong Peak at the same time as us and was washed by the Spirit Stream waterfall. You know how strong his physical strength is. Not to mention outsiders, how many people in Daozong Peak can defeat him? Shenghua looked at Shermu. Qin Hao had been in the Divine Palace for 2 days and was almost the same as the outsiders. It was rare for him to suppress Yu Hui in terms of strength. Shermu seemed to be prejudiced against Qin Hao. Don't talk nonsense. I don't mean anything in front of Master, Shermu said coldly. That's enough. You were taught a lesson by Eastern Sky. Even if you have a thorn in your heart, don't poke Qin Hao who just entered the Divine Palace. If you have the ability, go to Eastern Sky and save face. If you talk too much, you too will go to Xiantian Peak to refine 50,000 pounds of purple rock essence. True Lord Daozong scolded, and Shenghua and Shermu immediately shut up. Purple rock was definitely a powerful weapon of the Divine Palace. Outside the field, Yu Hui was shocked that Qin Hao had repelled him with one blow. This was enough to prove that he was suppressed in terms of strength. Ha! Yu Hui roared, and the golden essence qi around him raged. He didn't run up to Qin Hao to compete with brute force. Instead, he cleverly and decisively changed the way he fought. He formed a spell with his hands, and the essence qi around him spiraled into a whistling storm. In the storm, long spears condensed from essence chi flew out. They were extremely sharp. The golden spears lined up and stabbed towards Qin Hao's head. Water wind dodge. Essence chi poured into the soles of his feet. Qin Hao's steps were agile. He weaved through the rain of spears with movements that ordinary people couldn't understand and avoided the fierce attacks. Immediately, he closed in and punched again. He still didn't use the art of endless samsara. Still not using essence chi? Yu Hui asked. His palm flashed and the essence chi spear formed. The spear shot out like a dragon and aimed at Qin Hao's chest. Not fast enough. Qin Hao was anxious. Without essence chi, it was difficult to keep up with Yu Hui's speed. He would be injured before he could hit Yu Hui. He could only do as Yu Hui wished. Buzz. His essence chi flowed and flashed. A bright sword light appeared in his palm. Qin Hao gathered essence chi into a sword and the sword light pierced out. It broke through the space and collided with the tip of the spear. There was a sound of metal clashing in the air, but the next moment, the sword light was shattered by the tip of the spear. Sword shield. Qin Hao shouted. Yu Hui's essence chi was extraordinarily strong. The condensed spear shattered his sword chi. An even more majestic golden light shrouded down and turned into a heavy sword in front of him. The sharp spear light touched the back of the sword, and Qin Hao felt a tearing sensation in his soul. Immediately after, he retreated quickly and slashed down with his heavy sword. A surging flame aura slashed towards the golden spear that was thrusting towards him. Junior brother, your essence chi is lacking. Yu Hui's expression did not change. The tip of the spear swept and cut the flame sword light. At this time, the two once again pulled apart the distance, but neither of them made a move. The scene fell into a temporary silence, as if they were both thinking about their next move. Qin Hao really thinks he is invincible. He dares to challenge the senior brother of the previous generation. Feng Qianli sneered. Yu Hui's spear chi was indeed powerful. If you don't understand, then shut up. Qin Hao's essence chi strength is far inferior to the level of the Golden Bell he sent flying in fallen Emperor Bei. Shouwuk clearly noticed that Qin Hao's essence chi was weak. It was not the same as before. So what? Can you win if you are stronger? You should give up that ridiculous idea, Feng Qianli said. After all, Yu Hui was a disciple of the previous generation and had been honed in the Divine Palace. His essence chi strength was not something they could compare with. Chapter 1441. In a contest of strength, Yu Hui was obviously inferior to Qin Hao, which surprised both Shenghua and Shimu. But then, both sides changed their attacks. Yu Hui had cultivated qi for hundreds of years in the Divine Palace. His qi was so strong that he instantly turned the tables and suppressed Qin Hao. In the eyes of the higher-ups of Daozong Peak, this was normal. No matter how talented Qin Hao was, he lacked the training of the Divine Palace's special methods. His foundation could not be stronger than Yu Hui's. Unexpectedly, just as Yu Hui gained the upper hand, the battle changed again. The sword fell from the sky and Yu Hui's qi spear was cut in half. It seemed that Qin Hao's qi was suddenly strengthened. This is a cultivation method. Shimu's eyes were fixed on Qin Hao. At this moment, Qin Hao was standing in the middle of the field. His long hair danced in the wind, and his golden yuan qi flowed through his robes like liquid. Together with the Quan character on his chest, he exuded an awe-inspiring and domineering aura. It was as if he was a completely different person from before. Under his rising aura, Yu Hui seemed to be weakened. Qi below the Saint Plane is like mist. It can greatly strengthen a warrior's attack, but it is still limited by the rules of nature. Only when one has stepped onto the Saint Plane can his qi exist in liquid form. When he circulates it, it is like a surging river, a raging sea overturning the sky, and destroying mountains is nothing difficult. But I have never seen a warrior below the Emperor realm condense his qi into a solid form. Xinghua's eyes were as solemn as Shirmu's, trying to see through Qin Hao. Qin Hao's qi was very different from others. Even a warrior at the peak of the Emperor realm could release his qi in liquid form. Yu Hui's body and qi were far stronger than those of the outside world, because he had been tempered by Daozong Peak's spirit stream waterfall for 100 years. Even so, his qi only had a tendency to solidify, but there was still a big gap between it and the real step. Only when one stepped into the Emperor realm could their qi be condensed into a solid form. With the support of spiritual will, they could transform into anything. Although Qin Hao's Yuan qi wasn't as condensed as the Yuan qi of the Emperor realm, it was infinitely close to being corporeal. It was even stronger than Yu Hui's Yuan qi, which was simply unbelievable. It is indeed a cultivation technique. This brat's vital qi root base is indeed not as strong as Yu Feng's, but he is currently using a cultivation technique that compresses vital qi. This cultivation technique is so powerful that it is rarely seen in the world. I'm afraid its grade is not any weaker than Daozong Peak's Empress Hua Holy Spirit art. True Lord Daozong's eyes were sharp. His gaze seemed to have penetrated Qin Hao's body, capturing the flow of every strand of Yuan qi in his meridians. The primordial spirit is one of your talents. You did not use your full strength. Continue, Shirmu said. Yu Hui quietly clenched his fists, but seeing that Lord Daozong did not speak, he could only look at Qin Hao again and say, Junior brother Qin, let's play another round. I want to see your primordial spirit. Senior brother Yu, stop. You are indeed very good. Qin Hao immediately saluted Lord Daozong and turned to leave the training hall. If Yu Hui had gone all out, he might have had a chance to win, but he suppressed his realm to the same level as Qin Hao's, so it was impossible for him to win. Even without the primordial spirit duel, Qin Hao could estimate the result. If they played another round, Yu Hui would be even worse. Junior brother Qin Hao, you are the disciple of Migre's palace. If you do not receive well and the palace does not blame you, we cannot afford to bear the consequences. Or if you did not use the primordial spirit because you look down on the disciples of Daozong Peak, then where is your so-called talent? Shirmu said aggressively. Qin Hao stopped in his tracks and looked up at Shirmu. He then glanced at perfected Lord Daozong. What do you think, Uncle Master? Let's play another round. I also want to see your talent in the primordial spirit. Yu Hui, you don't have to suppress your realm. You are not Qin Hao's opponent in the same realm. You know how to control your strength. Don't use your realm too high and accidentally hurt Qin Hao. Lord Daozong said. Yes, Lord Daozong. Yu Hui was helpless. He regretted blindly sticking his neck out. Junior brother Qin, I will use my primordial spirit as a spear. Please enlighten me. After he finished speaking, an incomparably dazzling golden light bloomed from Yu Hui's body. A materialized soul spear materialized. A martial artist's primordial spirit was naturally more powerful than primordial qi. Under the Emperor realm, primordial qi could not materialize, but the primordial spirit could. This was the strength of a primordial spirit martial artist. Yu Hui's primordial spirit was a spear. All right. Unable to evade, Qin Hao could only continue fighting. Junior brother, be careful. I will raise my realm to the 4th level of the Emperor realm. With the soul spear in hand, Yu Hui's temperament changed significantly. His aura became sharper, just like the soul spear in his hand. You can raise it to the 5th level of the Emperor realm. Qin Hao said. Fire suppressed metal, so he should use the fire soul to deal with it. In this way, Yu Hui's soul power attribute would be suppressed again. Moreover, the red lotus tyrannical fire was extremely ferocious. It was ranked 2nd on the wondrous flame list. Even if it was 3 levels higher than Qin Hao's, the strength of the two sides would probably reach a point where Yu Hui would not be at a disadvantage. He's too arrogant again,